Chapter 999. It looked like he couldn't quite hold on. Luo Nan was no stranger to battles on the level of the Abyss region. He had a relatively accurate judgment of the situation. Actually, once one reached this level, the veil would be lifted on many things. The mysterious atmosphere would be completely gone. In the end, the attack and defense of the Abyss region were relatively simple at the current stage of Earth. The vast majority of battles relied on mobilizing the never-ending chaotic storm of the Abyss region, which came from nowhere, went nowhere, and formed impact damage. Whoever could build a more stable configuration in the Abyss region, give more efficient interference, and extract purer power would basically decide the outcome of the battle. Of course, upon reaching the extraordinary level, the structure would already be a domain. It could be solidified within the Abyss region, continuing to temper and nurture. The techniques and methods grasped would certainly be more numerous, and it would form a unique domain characteristic. Luo Nan's short fight with Constance, Monroe, and a few other mental-type extraordinary verified this point. Gong Qi's fleshly body was destroyed by Luo Nan's scheme. His solidified configuration in the Abyss region was the first to collapse. It was unknown how many of his trump cards were killed before he could use them. It could be said that Gong Qi died sullenly. From Luo Nan's perspective, President Ouyang's logic world and Luo Yuan's planar crossbow were truly superior in the Abyss region. The former had a strict structure and was practically flawless. The latter had the power of a domain that flew from beyond the heavens. They all gave off a feeling that they were unattainable. Compared to these powerful people who had already reached the top on Earth, Luo Nan had yet to confirm his solidified configuration in the Abyss region. The main reason was that he had the technique of pure observation. The interference effect of the Abyss region gave him a natural advantage over other ability users. He had more freedom to choose. Plus, his configuration design ability far exceeded his peers. He was more accustomed to improvising and seeking flexibility. There was another reason. Luo Nan had yet to find the path that suited him the most. This topic was a long one. There were also some subtle psychological factors. Putting these things aside for the time being, Luo Nan faced the tsunami-like momentum of the coward in front of him. Luo Nan was more or less regretful. He did not have a solidified configuration in the Abyss region that he could use freely. It was truly a headache at critical moments. This was because the contest between mental-type extraordinary could easily turn into an RTS game in a relatively long period of time. The process would be carried out according to the relevant process. Construct and expand the base, Abyss region configuration. Gather and seize resources, control the turbulence. After that, it was scouting and eliminating the enemy. And if the first strike didn't work, then they would start to push the level of the army to a higher level, constantly creating difficulties for the enemy and creating conditions for themselves. They would continue to research and develop technology in an attempt to create even more powerful units in order to obtain an overwhelming advantage. For someone like him who didn't have a fixed configuration, it was the same as having to build a base from scratch. Technology, troops, and so on would always be one level behind. Of course, Luo Nan had his own advantages. His advantage was that he had cheats. Pure observation mode was equivalent to turning on a satellite hack. For him, the fog of war was as good as nothing. Even if the enemy was on full defense, he could roughly see the nature of the fog and choose a more targeted configuration to deal with it. This advantage in intelligence could often help him eliminate the disadvantages in the early stages, and it was even more effective in encounters. The problem was that in this battle, he was in a rather sorry state. Luo Nan wasn't too clear on whether or not his opponent had solidified his configuration in the chasm region. However, his opponent's ability to control the torrential storm of the chasm region was truly beyond imagination. Moreover, they didn't use any tricks, they just used a dignified formation to suppress him. Even though Luo Nan used the techniques he was used to in the past, he was still at a disadvantage in the face of this powerful and majestic power. But was this the difference in strength? Luo Nan was still a bit unconvinced. After all, what he had here was just a kite with a tattered soul cloak. He had no choice but to release it. It was a water vapor fake body. At best, it was a node that delivered energy. The mobilization of power was truly too much to handle. His opponent wasn't here with his real body, but looking at the tens of thousands of marine life gathered in the surrounding sea region, there were large amounts of parasitic dynamo cores. Their carriers on the material plane were quite impressive. On one side is a battery, and on the other side is an ultra-high voltage transmission line. There's no way to compare. Well, this was what Luo Nan had brought upon himself. He had chosen the difficulty level himself, so he had to grit his teeth and fight to the end. Luo Nan had given the coward the opportunity to fully display his abilities, so he had to swallow the bitter fruit that came with it. After this wave of attacks, he had to resist the next wave of even more terrifying tsunamis. The true tsunamis always had a direction. His opponent had utilized the complex environment of the chasm region to the greatest extent, hiding himself tightly. Luo Nan had some ideas regarding his opponent's position. Even though he didn't know his foundation, the outline elements outlined in his mind grew clearer and clearer after a few rounds of pondering. But in the end, his heart palpitated due to his opponent's intense reaction. For the time being, he didn't have any thoughts of drawing the psychic diagram. Everyone was still in a stalemate right now, and they were all using clones and long-range gestures. Overall, they were all under proper control. It seemed that Her Majesty Empress Wu had a bit of a friendship with the other side. Luo Nan didn't want to let the conflict intensify and inexplicably recruit another powerful enemy. But in this way, his options to break out of this predicament grew fewer and fewer. Less was good. Focus. Since he didn't have the leeway to choose, Luo Nan calmed down completely. During this window of time when the tsunami was about to arrive, he temporarily didn't care about the situation in the chasm region or the changes in the surrounding sea region. He just collected his mind and sensed his temporary body. Luo Nan earnestly sensed the water vapor that made up this body. He sensed the complex processes of disintegration, flow, exchange, and reconstruction under the impact of the violent winds and waves. He also casually verified a few structural patterns he obtained from dumb sand in the beach experiment. He waited until he felt that it was about time. Actually, it didn't even take a few seconds. His core telepathic thoughts suddenly soared high into the chasm region and connected with the Mother Mica configuration. His mind was entrusted to the Mother Mica. A large wave came crashing over in the next second. Luo Nan's body suddenly transformed into droplets of water and foam, collapsing and disappearing without a trace. The unforeseen event happened too quickly. Zhang Yingying, who was in the driver's seat, suddenly rushed forward a step. Her head and palm collided with the glass at the same time. Only then did she suddenly remember. The Luo Nan in front of her was simply condensed from water vapor. But what was she doing? It felt a lot smoother. In the end, Luo Nan couldn't compare to when the soul cloak was at its peak. The fake water vapor body projected over was no problem for him to deal with normal situations, but it would certainly be very difficult for him to deal with a psychic expert of the extraordinary level. Not to mention that he had to split his attention to other things. He had to leave a considerable portion of his mind with the Mother Mica. This would only pointlessly divide his limited energy. So Luo Nan made a prompt decision. He made a choice. He projected the soul strength of his avatar directly into the Mother Mica. He allowed this simple energy node to truly become a battery. It was no longer a separate structure. All it did was provide the Mother Mica with energy support, allowing the Mother Mica to use its own method to deal with the upcoming challenge. This could be considered as helping Luo Nan take a step further in his experiments. Luo Nan had never forgotten that his most important task right now was to verify the quality of the Mother Mica. He had to strive to reach a usable and referential level. Everything else had to be pushed back. Momentary success or failure didn't count for anything. Even if he was defeated by the coward in front of him, he only had an avatar here. He also had the support of Her Majesty Empress Wu. Would his life be in danger? Right now, he had to expose the problem. The more thoroughly he exposed it, the clearer the direction of his future adjustments would be. So Luo Nan's train of thought was set. The Universal Electromagnetic Layout Method, the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss region, the space-time configuration. All of it made way for the Mother Mica. He let this artifact, which was still extremely weak for the time being, possess miraculous qualities, face off against the coward over there. Well, of course, he wouldn't fight it head-on. Luo Nan didn't forget that the Mother Mica wasn't up to standard in terms of pure life energy intensity. It was impossible for it to face off against an extraordinary. If Luo Nan allowed the Mother Mica to accumulate energy and let the next tsunami shake the Abyss region, breaking through all barriers, then there would be no need to compete. Luo Nan would immediately hug Her Majesty Empress Wu's thigh and cry for help. What Luo Nan did right now was to strike the Mother Mica midstream. As Luo Nan's train of thought became clear, An even greater amount of control threads were tossed out from the Mother Mica side as if they were free. Yes, they were free. The only things consumed were energy and computing power. And Luo Nan could still support these for a period of time. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Even though Luo Nan's soul cloak was damaged, it had recovered over the past 2 days. In addition to the fact that they were on the ocean with abundant water vapor, the area it covered around the water vapor avatar exceeded the average standard of extraordinary. Luo Nan's senses were Mother Mica's senses. Right now, the area that the control thread spread out rapidly exploded from the few kilometers around the yacht to a diameter of nearly 100 kilometers. The depth of the control threads reached several kilometers into the deep water region. They practically stuck to the seabed as they swept past, and they continued to expand. They had already reached the level of flinging control threads at any living creature. Well, it wasn't that extravagant. The main goal was to target the coward over there and capture the target of its flesh and dynamo core's parasite. The first thing to do was to encircle it. Luo Nan had never been afraid of anyone when it came to the range of his mental senses and interference. This task only took 2 seconds of Mother Mica's time. Luo Nan received 100 times, 1,000 times more segmented information than before. This information involved all aspects of the flesh and dynamo core and its host. It was no small task to integrate and sort them out clearly. But this wasn't the most crucial thing. The most pressing problem placed before Luo Nan was to adapt to a new form. When all the information was absorbed and presented through the single channel of Mother Mica, the form of existence of this wave of information was clearly different from what Luo Nan had experienced in the past. Luo Nan was unable to see any form of flesh and organ structure within the visual information phenomenon. He couldn't even see the existence of too many substances. Most of the time, there were just ink-like shadows in the water, as well as faint fluorescent trails that flickered within the shadows. Chapter 1000. The shadows slowly unfurled, like fragmented wisps of smoke, drifting back and forth. The fluorescent light seemed to be broken and connected. It was like spider silk in the forest, faintly forming a net. Luo Nan didn't want to give these phenomena a so-called figurative analogy. This was because there was no comparison at all. If he were to switch to his original perspective, no matter how he cut it, the flesh would still be flesh and blood, and the organs would still be organs. There would just be a few more angles of view, a few more connections that were hard to see with the naked eye. He could use configuration theory to explain this. He absolutely wouldn't be like he was right now. He had practically completely shed away all familiar traces of concepts. It was as if he had entered a world of another dimension. But this wasn't unexpected. After all, the structure of the existence of Mother Mica was as different as heaven and earth from the prior perceptual structure of humans. Humans' usual method of decoding external information was completely incompatible with Mother Mica. Therefore, Luo Nan's attention was focused on Mother Mica. It wasn't a simple tilt of his attention. Instead, it was the mutual translation of the two cognitive systems. It was the deep coupling of the two systems. Fortunately, there was a certain commonality between the two. For example, configuration. Right now, there was only configuration. Configuration could act as a translator between the two. Through this intermediate link, Luo Nan was able to guess a few things. The shadows he saw should be a large amount of sea creatures, yachts, oceans, atmosphere and so on, as well as the aura, energy, and even soul strength radiating from them. Ordinary people and even ability users could see all things on the material and mental plane. They were nothing more than shadows and smoke in the background. Of course, there were a few details that differentiated them, but they weren't important. As for the fluorescent light that faintly formed a net, Luo Nan guessed that this should be the core connection structure of some sort of system. This could be explained using configuration theory or superconfiguration theory. But from the perspective of Mother Mica, Luo Nan could see the existence and direct results of the connections and effects. Luo Nan could faintly feel that what he had observed so far was only the tip of the iceberg of these fluorescent lines. There should be even more details in the deeper layers of visible fluorescent light. It was just that his current level of observation and segmentation wasn't quite enough. His understanding of Mother Mica's perspective and his proficiency in using it were lacking. He needed more time to adapt. When it came to adapting, there was nothing more effective than actual combat. At this moment, Mother Mica had basically trapped all of the hosts of the flesh dynamo cores that the cowards had sent to the surrounding seas. She had completely trapped them in an inescapable net set up by millions and millions of control wires. Not counting the ordinary marine creatures, there were about 6,000 to 7,000 aberrations. Among them, 5% and 0.5% of them had rank C and rank B life forms. According to the basic knowledge Luo Nan had learned about mutants, this number of mutants was more or less the limit of what the marine ecosphere with a radius of 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers could bear. Luo Nan thought that if the coward hadn't chased after Niu Gui earlier, the surrounding sea region might not have been able to gather so many hosts. Niu Gui was definitely going to be the scapegoat for today's troubles. However, this also meant that no matter how capable that coward was, it was impossible for him to mobilize more high-quality hosts to enter the deep-sea Evil Eye domain array in a short period of time. Luo Nan could be considered to have seen the peak of coward for a period of time. This could barely be considered a benefit. Since the inventory was complete and the numbers were clear, Luo Nan no longer had any reason to delay. At this moment, the subtle and close interaction between stupid sand and mica jellyfish during the experiment on the zeolite beach flashed in his consciousness again. The vast majority of the results had already become the projection technique of the control wires. However, there was still a portion, the part where the control wires interfered with stupid sand's physical grains of sand. Luo Nan never verified it again due to some considerations. Actually, this shouldn't be the case. After all, Mother Mica's reference object, the magnetic photon mica mother, didn't merely use soul magnetization to control puppets. Mother Mica's terrifying ability included warping the plane of space and time, transcending worlds to summon powerful foreign species. It also included gluing and piecing together millions upon millions of different life substrates to form inconceivable warped creations. The powerful warping and reconstruction power of the material plane and life plane was perhaps closer to the core of Mother Mica's ability. In this aspect, Luo Nan's experiments were relatively conservative due to considerations of concealment and ethics. However, it couldn't be said that there weren't any at all. There was at least one area where Luo Nan hadn't disintegrated his water vapor body. Luo Nan had been referring to the interaction between stupid sand and Mother Mica all this time, allowing the water vapor body and Mother Mica to form a close connection. His efforts in this aspect allowed the water vapor body to smoothly fuse with Mother Mica. At the very least, the work of the battery wasn't bad. And right now, Luo Nan didn't just need to use this interference method for fusion. He also needed to walk in the direction of destruction. The reason why the coward on the other side was able to form a tsunami-like attack from such a great distance was absolutely because he relied on the frames erected by the hosts of the flesh and blood dynamo cores around him. Why did Luo Nan need to directly resist? Wouldn't it be over if he just flattened these frames? Could he? Of course he could. Right now, practically every strand of control wire was undergoing endless deep segmentation within the corresponding frame of the sea creature's body and soul. The strengths and weaknesses of each frame, as well as the state of the parasitic flesh and blood dynamo cores within these frames, all flowed through Mother Mica's perception system. Even though Mother Mica's observation perspective didn't possess the heart, brain, blood vessels, and other vital physiological points in the conventional sense, it didn't need to. Wouldn't it be fine if the system frame collapsed? This was what Luo Nan had designed. This was what he did. He was like a cautious researcher. He followed the principle of starting from easy to difficult, dividing into groups, and implementing strategies by classification. First, he experimented on an ordinary sea fish. Well, it wasn't difficult at all. At least, this was true from Mother Mica's point of view. The cluster of shadows that represented the sea fish had a pitifully weak fluorescent structure within it. It was directly torn apart, and then Luo Nan really didn't know what happened next. His experiments were done too thoroughly. He said that he was focused on Mother Mica, but he really didn't want to be distracted by anything else. He was limited by Mother Mica's special point of view, and he didn't have a concrete reference. He really couldn't figure out what the fate of the sea fish was after its original structure was destroyed. It should be dead. The control lines could still display their effects, but there was a marvelous feeling of sluggishness during the subsequent segmentation. It made the originally smooth segmentation become completely devoid of feeling. The shadowy portion of the visual field became even more fluffy. The fluorescent lines, which were originally weak to the point of being non-existent, were practically completely erased. Perhaps this state could be defined as the death of the manipulated target? The current Luo Nan couldn't be said to be a babbling baby learning how to speak. He was like a foreigner who held a dictionary and charged headlong into a new world where he didn't know the language. Actually, he was more like a pitiful worm who retained the memories of his previous life and reincarnated into the body of another species. He needed to match his new experiences bit by bit with the concepts of his previous life. Some could be done, but some couldn't be found no matter what. It was impossible to find an accurate matching point. Of course Luo Nan wasn't used to this, but his reason after learning and learning told him this was right. Back in the day, the School of Fantasy had attempted to restore the magneto-optic mica. Luo Nan was unable to accurately judge just by relying on the version of the fantasy mimicry technique that Lieutenant Go Yi had imparted to him. But in this stage where the life stroma was already faintly budding, the School of Fantasy still possessed a considerable amount of experience in the cultivation of other fantasy species. Luo Nan had brought out the basic principles of the School of Fantasy. He had brainwashed Meng Chong, and he had given a lesson to all the ability users of the world. He had forced Meng Chong to experience the extreme state of the Hellfire Tyrant. The life stroma was determined by the life stroma, and it was driven by the instinctive desire to survive. Right now, Luo Nan had encountered such a situation. Under this innate format, which was completely different from ordinary perceptual modes, how did the mica exist? How did it sense? How did it leap from the life stroma level? What sort of desire and drive was produced? It wasn't too clear at the moment. The mica had cast millions and millions of control lines onto the marine life. Admittedly, there were some unique configurations bestowed with natural patterns, but Luo Nan's will still played a part in the casting itself. It couldn't be considered a driving force that sought survival. It was more like a mechanical propulsion mechanism that had been programmed. Therefore, there was still a long way to go. The more it was like this, the more he had to toss and turn with all his might. Luo Nan wasn't anxious. On the contrary, he was enjoying it. Wasn't the current experiment helping him quickly understand the scale delineation between life and death from the mica's point of view? After the experiment with normal sea fish was over, there were still normal parasitized sea fish. Then there were normal aberrations and normal parasitized parasites. There were also C rank, B rank. Layer by layer, they were compared. Oh, he nearly forgot. There was a coward glaring like a tiger watching its prey from the side. Luo Nan's experiment was done very quickly. The difficulty of the experiment wasn't high. With a few control groups, he had already dealt with over 100 targets under C rank. There weren't any twists and turns at all. He didn't even need to consider configurations or systems. He just needed to use the control lines to tear apart those fluorescent lines. It was so simple that it made Luo Nan feel a chill in his heart. In a certain sense, this was the embodiment of the difference between the mica and the life forms Luo Nan was familiar with in the past. There was a difference in levels. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan didn't feel too comfortable with such a discovery. Then Luo Nan felt that rather than doing this simple work, it would be better to aim at the flesh and blood dynamo core and directly make contact with it. It would be more challenging. Of course, it would be more meaningful for the experiment. Chapter 1001. From the perspective of Mother Mica, the existence of the flesh and blood dynamo core was actually more conspicuous than the vast majority of marine life. It was independent of the host's relatively stretched fluorescent structure. Its presence was stronger, like a nerve not existing on a neural network. Or a tumor. The kind that glowed. The special mode of existence of the flesh and blood dynamo core directly affected and even distorted the layout of light and shadow from the perspective of Mother Mica. And most importantly, a considerable portion of the flesh and blood dynamo core seemed to possess independence and could survive independently. Luo Nan had already noticed that even if he directly killed the host and destroyed the visible fluorescent structure, a considerable portion of the nodules were able to withdraw in time after destroying the host's system of existence. They wandered in the vaster shadow of life, seeking another cluster of fluorescent structure to bond and parasitize the host again. Well, Luo Nan was able to find a relatively familiar sense of space and time when placed from this point of view. Moreover, he naturally broke away from the limitations of a living individual and placed his gaze into a dimension that was completely constructed from shadows and light. In this way, the individual faded away and the entirety became prominent. Luo Nan was able to clearly perceive the overall structure of the array that the opponent had built upon the foundation of the flesh and blood dynamo core. Speaking of which, wasn't the efficiency of a single kill too low? If he were to start from the structure as a whole, Luo Nan's thoughts stirred and the entire layout of light and shadow under his clairvoyance suddenly shook. The shadow of smoke and ink separated and reunited irregularly. The fluorescent lines clearly trembled, driving the tens of thousands of nodules within the large net. It was like a colorful lantern being blown by the wind. It was extremely beautiful. However, this dazzling scene wasn't just the result of Luo Nan's interference. There was also the terrifying power of the coward that was pressing closer. Oh my! This person has finally entered the fray. It was just a joke. Luo Nan had nearly forgotten about this person. The opponent could really hold back. He had already established an absolute advantage in the Abyss region, but he still hadn't arrived. Actually, it was only a few dozen seconds. But on the level of extraordinary, a few dozen seconds was enough for many people to die 100 times over. Of course, Luo Nan could faintly understand some of the factors. When he gave up the fake body of water vapor and merged with Mother Mica, he decisively abandoned all the attack and defense structures in the Abyss area. Even the Bloody Soul Temple in the Abyss area was hidden again. Plus the high invisibility of Mother Mica, that dude probably couldn't find the target anymore. In such a situation, as a coward that Her Majesty Empress Wu had labeled, what would the other side think? What to do? If that fellow turned around and directly attacked the yacht, Luo Nan would absolutely not sit idly by, regardless of whether or not Her Majesty Empress Wu was on board. But the problem was that there weren't any. That person controlled the torrential storm in the Abyss area with an astonishing level of control, causing it to hang in the air but not fall, pouring down but not falling. Yet, he was hesitating over there. In the past, Luo Nan always felt that he was overthinking things sometimes. But this person, even if she was intimidated by Her Majesty Empress Wu, was acting a bit too hesitant. So much so that Luo Nan suspected that if he hadn't experimented with the hosts of the fleshly dynamo cores and more or less indicated the direction, that coward would still be able to persevere like this. In any case, the rapid disappearance of the hosts of the fleshly dynamo cores had subtly exceeded the natural reduction rate of the chaotic bloody situation in the sea. And Luo Nan's deliberate targeting of the fleshly dynamo cores finally aroused the vigilance of that person. No matter how deeply Mother Mica was hidden, there would always be traces once it interfered with the material plane. The coward's accomplishments in the mental side didn't need to be mentioned. He quickly followed the traces. In the beginning, he wanted to directly grab the interference trajectory of the control thread and trace it back to the Abyss area. He wanted to grab Luo Nan's weak point in one fell swoop. However, even Luo Nan himself had to carefully ponder over the interference mode of Mother Mica. How could the coward chase after him in a hurry? After crossing paths a few times in the void, the other side knew that it wouldn't work. He quickly changed his train of thought. He only maintained pressure in the Abyss area and began to pour more power into the various locations of the fleshly dynamo cores. He adopted a posture of waiting for the rabbit to come to him. I know you're coming. I'll give it to you. The other side grasped the main point. It was impossible for Luo Nan to avoid it at this time. He held an eager heart as he made further contact with the numerous luminous nodes under the Mother Mica's light and shadow perspective. This was a true collision. There was no room for buffer. This also represented that the RTS game in the Abyss area had sunk into the material plane. To be more precise, this was a battle for resources. The two warring sides were involved in every domain. In this level of conflict, Luo Nan actually held the initiative. This was because he was the one who chose the method of impact. This naturally led to the result of the impact. The collision between the two sides completely erupted from the start. The shaking affected the entire situation. Moreover, the range of influence and penetration on the system level made the impact more intense. The target bearing the impact became more fragile. From the Mother Mica's perspective, at least several hundred to nearly 1,000 fluorescent threads that represented the connection of life systems collapsed at the same time. The feeling of collapse was crisp, the range of connection was wide, and the speed at which they were transmitted to each other was fast. Even Luo Nan, who had already gone through several rounds of experimentation, was caught unprepared. So much so that he spent at least half of his energy forcefully tossing and turning to create a safe zone or isolation zone. He placed it horizontally around the yacht to prevent the aftermath of the impact from truly affecting Zhang Yingying and the others. Well, this was a stress reaction. It might not be necessary. This was because even with the Mother Mica's relatively chaotic observation method, It was easy to recognize that a certain region in the shadow should belong to Her Majesty Empress Wu's unique form of existence. There were a dozen bright and resplendent stars in the depths of the heavy shadow. They looked like a rapidly evolving star chart. They possessed their own orbit, and they radiated brilliant rays of light in all directions. They locked down an extremely stable shadow region. They basically encircled the yacht within. This was a bit like the result of Luo Nan's observation of the living starry sky, but it was more complex and nimble. It formed its own layout. Luo Nan could vaguely see that there were fluorescent lines between the dozen or so stars. However, the radiance of the stars was far too dazzling, and their orbit was far too complex. It was to the extent that the lines were blurry and ever-changing. It was hard to observe them a step further. Let's not talk about trying things out for now. It was just that Luo Nan didn't know if this phenomenon was possessed by all extraordinaries, or if it was exclusive to Her Majesty Empress Wu. Luo Nan divided his attention here for a moment, but he soon gathered it back together. He returned to the conflict and the experiment itself. The effects of the shaking continued in other areas outside of the yacht. Having lost the layer of restriction of fluorescent lines, the shadow region, which could represent all of humanity's perceptible objects, shook off even more loosely. It was to the point that the outlines of some individuals that could be barely seen and guessed became blurry and faded. It was as if all forms of existence were erased. Luo Nan didn't have the energy to think about the corresponding scene in reality for the time being. He could only confirm that when the shadow was stirred into even finer pieces, there were a few dozen or even 100 luminous nodes that couldn't avoid being instantly unhooked. They scattered in all directions. However, these luminous bodies, which represented the flesh and blood dynamo core, had an extremely strong existence. Even under these circumstances, the vast majority of them still maintained their integrity. They wandered within the diffused shadow, attempting to carry out a new parasitic cycle. Of course, the parasitic cycle from Micah's perspective didn't involve grabbing a piece of the shadow region and forcefully stuffing it in. Instead, Luo Nan had to hook onto the fluorescent lines that barely existed amidst the shaking and merge them into his new life system. This was by no means easy, and it caused a corner of the coward's long-range interference array to suddenly sink into chaos. That side clearly didn't catch Luo Nan's method of exerting force in time, so the efficiency of their response was quite low. Even though they didn't receive any damage, they still had to sort out the order of the array once more. They were still a bit flustered for a time. Luo Nan's first wave of attacks occupied an advantage, but it was just a surprise. The actual results of the battle weren't that great. However, the swimming and churning of the luminous nodes stimulated even more details. It also helped Luo Nan's increasingly mutated senses to touch upon even more and more complex details. Luo Nan faintly captured a sort of seemingly familiar rubbing effect within the surrounding environment of violent shaking. It could collapse at any time, and it could reform at any time. This kind of rubbing happened between the shadows of mind and matter, between two fluorescent systems that were originally unrelated. Gradually, it crossed the barriers and boundaries that humans were accustomed to, such as each other, virtual and real, body and soul, and so on. The originally simple connection suddenly became hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of times more complicated, forming an interaction that crossed multiple levels and dimensions at the same time. From a human's perspective of observation and thought, if one wanted to clearly understand the nature of this effect, which was exponentially increasing in complexity every second, one could practically spiral to the heavens on the spot. But from Micah's unique simplified perspective, this was nothing more than the splitting and merging of the shadows of the dark clouds and the collision and friction of the fluorescent framework. Although it was complex, it was still an observable object. More importantly, when the complexity of this series of changes reached a certain degree, the rubbing effect became even more abundant. Marvelous sparks burst forth from within. At first, they flickered in an instant, rising and falling in an unpredictable manner. Later on, they became wisps and wisps, faintly discernible. Later on, these sparks began to chase each other back and forth, interfering and colliding with each other. They wandered between the shadows and fluorescent light. Most of the time they could only exist for an extremely short period of time. But even the blink of an eye was enough to produce a clear effect on the surrounding structure of light and shadow. The luminous nodes of the fleshly dynamo core could also form an effect on the surroundings. But when the two were compared, there was no comparison. Wherever these sparks appeared, The shadows that had just dispersed and the ruptured fluorescent light would seem to have fallen into a powerful force field. They would be forcibly and haphazardly twisted and pieced together. But soon, they would collapse and scatter once again due to improper operation. This made the chaotic situation even more chaotic. Luonan didn't care how the chaos intensified. He just went to make logical deductions. Magnetolite? Chapter 1002. That's right. This was the magnetic light that Luonan had tried to capture and trace, but he had failed time and time again. It occurred outside of the main skeleton of the mica, but it was within the domain controlled by the control lines. There wasn't much difference between the two. This was because these little things existed for a short period of time. They quickly captured the most stable interference channels within the surrounding structures and quickly formed a connection. In this way, the magnetic light continued to grow in scale. It passed through the control lines in a form close to a pulse, and it was channeled into the main body of the mica. Luonan was still repeating his thoughts from not too long ago. Perhaps this is the magnetic light of the magnetic light of the magnetic light mica. While his thoughts were still undulating, a new force occurred within the water vapor skeleton of the mica. The one affected was now Luonan himself. This time, it was impossible to say whether Luonan had captured the magnetic light, or whether the magnetic light had stuck to him, or whether the magnetic light had already deeply fused with the mica and transmitted it to him as a feedback of perception. Oh, something didn't seem right? It was due to the marvelous force of the magnetic light that Luonan suddenly discovered that the two systems of the mica and the fake body, which he thought had already fused together, were actually separated from each other on a deeper level. Even though they both belonged to the structure of water vapor, their physical properties were already indistinguishable from each other. As for what it was no longer important. In the instant the magnetic light force appeared, that faintly discernible barrier was simply annihilated. The two systems were completely connected together. Luonan's thoughts suddenly became absent-minded. Then he discovered that the structure that had previously acted as a battery for the mica, the only function that the fake body of water vapor still had already been cleanly dissociated. Or it could be said that it had been absorbed cleanly by the structure of the mica. Right now, only a few core things remained. It was the imprint of Luonan's consciousness. It floated within the structure of the mica, about to fuse or not. This sort of change didn't harm Luonan. It was just baffling. Just as he was feeling baffled, this bit of imprint of consciousness suddenly stirred. It collided with something and instantly fused with it. His consciousness was still there, but it seemed to be wrapped in a layer of shell. It just moved in this way in the void. To be more precise, it was moving irregularly within the structure of the mica. What was going on? It was as if I had been fused into the magnetic light? To put it more precisely, the greatest possibility was that the imprint of Luonan's consciousness that Luonan left in this world was not Mother Cloud. Instead, it was fused together with the magnetic light that Mother Cloud used to transform into. Before Luonan could figure out the logic behind this, a new perceptual change appeared. Luonan's soul cloak, the great production line of the living starry sky, the altar spiderweb, and other traditional energy and information supply channels clearly became estranged. One must know that this was the most important source of sustenance for the mica mother. The supply is still being provided, and the effectiveness is still effective, but it feels a little like scratching an itch through the boot. The bionic life structure of Mother Mica was clearly continuing to grow steadily, and its aura was growing more and more exuberant. But for some reason Luonan very hungry. And he was getting hungrier and hungrier. What's going on? Stir-fry vegetables and make soup? In the cockpit of the yacht, Zhang Yingying's forehead was pressed against the glass, almost melting the surface, but at the same time, her fingertips were a little cold. Her mouth spoke in a relaxed manner, but her heart was twitching a bit abnormally. This was a natural physiological reaction to a few extremely stimulating situations. It was unknown when it started, but the surrounding waters of the yacht entered an extremely desperate and treacherous situation. It was hard for Zhang Yingying to accurately describe the situation. It was as if there was a layer of glass separating her from the chaos of the sea. There was an insurmountable barrier between her thoughts and the internal logic of the events before her eyes. Who could see two fishes that had gone out of control and collided with each other, sticking together? In that instant, their bodies, flesh, and blood completely lost their original nature. It was as if they were wax that had been melted, condensing into the most random shape upon meeting the cold. Such a scene was not an exception. Instead, it was happening in the waters surrounding the yacht. Zhang Yingying could see it happening every moment. There was no need for any collisions. The seemingly vigorous sea creatures that could rampage up and down the waves as they pleased inexplicably had their entire bodies collapse. It wasn't being torn apart, it wasn't being crushed, it wasn't exploding, it wasn't being burned, and so on. It was the complete collapse of the structure of their flesh and blood in an instant. Moreover, there was no trace of a strong external force. You couldn't say that it was the wind and waves on the sea that caused this, right? There were only vaguely visible conduction trajectories, like a terrible virus that broke out in a certain area and then spread rapidly at a terrible speed and intensity. In the steering cabin, the cabin wall blocked the view, and she couldn't see the panoramic view of the surrounding waters. She didn't know how far this terrible scene would spread before it ended. But she could see that at this time, in addition to the foam of the waves, the dregs and slurry of the flesh and blood were also swept up by the strong wind and huge waves. The bloody waves hit the yacht. Zhang Yingying felt that the damage was much higher than the previous battleship slicing sword. In fact, there were a lot of indescribable debris stuck to the windshield of the steering cabin. Then, it was swept away by the wind and waves, stuck to it again, and swept away again. The cycle repeated itself. Zhang Yingying adjusted herself and felt that her breathing had become shallow. Even so, there was still some fishy smell lingering at the tip of her nose. She knew that it was an illusion, but she still felt it. Who in the world is that? A devil? Zhang Yingying didn't have a clear target for conversation. She just vented her emotions. She never expected Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was steering the helm, to respond in the first instant. Yeah. You can ask later. Ha! Zhang Yingying blinked her eyes. She kept feeling that her boss's words had a hidden meaning. But she couldn't think too much about it right now. The battle situation in the surrounding waters far exceeded the scope of her understanding. She was even more worried. Luo Nan's water vapor body had disappeared. How was he going to fight against that so-called coward? How did such a hellish situation occur? I'll go out and take a look. Zhang Yingying really couldn't hold back. She leaped to the door of the steering cabin in 2 or 3 steps, but she hesitated for a moment. The out-of-control scene outside had an intense dissuading effect. But in the end, she gritted her teeth, opened the door, and went out. Meng Chong nodded toward Her Majesty Empress Wu and followed behind without a sound. Right now, Zhang Yingying really didn't have the courage to run to the front deck. She simply went to the top deck and stood at the highest point. This was also the position furthest away from the bloody waves. She raised her eyes and looked into the distance. She still couldn't see Luo Nan's figure between the sea and the sky. However, the dark clouds gathered together, and the winds and waves were high. They stirred the blood and flesh that rose and fell on the surface of the sea, rushing back and forth. They still possessed the destructive power to capsize the yacht at any time. Zhang Yingying didn't know how much of this was the power of nature, and how much of it was the clash of power between two extraordinaries. She just felt that she was standing at a relatively high place. She raised her eyes and saw a contradiction that made her feel uncomfortable. It was intense and sinister. It was berserk and ice-cold. It was as if there were incorporeal ghosts roaming and laughing on the surface of the sea. Perhaps it was because of this that the sea creatures in the surrounding waters, which had been fighting over food with each other not too long ago, began to dive frantically. It didn't matter if they lived in the layer of seawater or not. They all wanted to drill down, all for the sake of avoiding the virus in the atmosphere and within the remains of flesh and blood on the surface of the sea. But was it truly effective? The more Zhang Yingying thought, the more she couldn't find an answer. Instead, it burned her brain. Perhaps it was because of this that breathing became a bit difficult. Honestly speaking, after her field of vision was broadened, the situation in the surrounding waters became more vivid. The sense of crisis that followed grew stronger. So much so that she felt a bit regretful. Her legs felt a bit weak. She unconsciously emitted a brilliant spiritual light, making the white rainbow in her body activate its defensive mode. If the oncoming sea winds and waves really did carry a virus or something, that would be too hard to accept. At this moment, the familiar rhythm of footsteps entered her ears. Zhang Yingying turned her head in surprise. She saw a figure turn around at the entrance of the deck. It was Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had been staying in the cockpit all this time. Boss. Her Majesty Empress Wu slightly narrowed her eyes. She welcomed the oncoming gale and the damp, bloody air. She seemed to be sniffing something. Her expression was vivid, but it was hard to tell whether she liked or disliked it. 2 seconds later, Her Majesty Empress Wu turned her face. If you're really afraid, then go back to the cabin. I'm afraid? Just a little bit. Besides, you're here, boss. Seeing Her Majesty Empress Wu, Zhang Yingying's mind immediately calmed down. Her mouth also began to become nimble. What was even more nimble than her mouth was her actions. Zhang Yingying directly ran to Her Majesty Empress Wu's side and tightly hugged the crook of her arm. Boss, that guy is too much. He knows you're here, but he still made such a scene. Her Majesty Empress Wu only smiled. He's indeed too much, but he can't do it for long. A battle between transcendents. They're having fun killing here, but T-City can't take it anymore. The fighter plane just took off, and it won't take long to get here. Zhang Yingying blurted out. Did he come here to die? It's all right. The pilot is quite durable. Obviously, the pilot that Her Majesty Empress Wu mentioned was definitely not an ordinary person. He was most likely an extraordinaire. As Zhang Yingying was thinking, she heard her boss ask, You really don't want to go back? With that guy's clumsy control skills, it's fine if he gets a few fish scales on your face. But what if it's tentacles, sarcomas, sharp teeth, or something? That's not good. What? Ha! Zhang Yingying finally came back to her senses. She didn't know when it started, but everyone's target had been mistaken? But before Zhang Yingying could find the rational clues she should have from her disbelief, a wave of reverberations suddenly rang out beside her ear. It sounded like a strange snoring sound as if someone was choking on water. There were also muffled sounds of mooing and splashing sounds. There was no sense of hierarchy, and it was just a flurry of struggling. Zhang Yingying very naturally shifted her gaze to look, and saw that there was an explosion of water on the side of the ship. A certain strange existence with half of its huge bull body jumped out of the sea. It crazily waved its spider-like limbs at the yacht. It didn't seem to realize that its body was still covered in a layer of blood and minced meat. Looking at it, it didn't need to think to know that it was calling for help. Did he knock himself out of his mind? Chapter 1003. Zhang Yingying had a strange feeling when she faced the instigator of the trouble at sea. Could it be that this bro had forgotten who was the one who had attacked it just now? Speaking of which, the reason it was still alive and kicking was probably because of its iron head. It didn't seem to be a problem with its head. Zhang Yingying quickly noticed that the bull demon's chest and abdomen were already the most eye-catching. Now, in the night, it was even more eye-catching. The dark green fluorescence was originally rather dark, and the dizziness was rather serious. But now, it was fluctuating violently, as if it was boiling. Perhaps it was even showing signs of vaporization? Zhang Yingying was just letting her imagination run wild. But visually, the bull demon's big belly was indeed swelling up. The extent of the swelling could be seen, as if it could explode at any moment. Perhaps this was the reason for the bull demon's cry for help. This fellow seemed to be in so much pain that he quickly lost his patience. After struggling for a while, he threw caution to the wind and jumped onto the yacht under Her Majesty Empress Wu's gaze. From the looks of it, it was about to fly directly to the top deck. Wow! Zhang Yingying let out a soft cry. But as expected, there was another muffled sound. An invisible wall appeared out of nowhere in the atmosphere, blocking the bull demon's head. The fellow had only jumped a few meters before it crashed into the wall. With a miserable groan, it fell back down. But perhaps it was just luck? A huge wave rolled over, and the sea instantly rose by 3 to 5 meters. This caused the angle of its falling body to change, and it actually crashed into the railing on the side of the lower deck before it flipped over. The huge belly even acted as a buffer, helping it bounce a few times on the deck, railing, and bulkhead. In the end, it fell flat on its back, to the point that the dark green fluorescence within it seemed like it was about to seep out. She was really worried that it would explode just like that. But no matter what, the bull demon had still safely boarded the yacht. This alone made it much luckier than the other creatures in the surrounding waters. Based on what Zhang Yingying could barely sense with her own mental senses, the marine creatures, be they ordinary shoals of fish or mutated species, were mostly unable to escape misfortune even if they hid under the surface of the sea. For many creatures, Even though they had dived to a depth of dozens of meters, they still couldn't avoid the experience. The air, the seawater, and the marine creatures themselves were cooperating to create blood-curdling flowers of flesh and blood, which were blossoming at various depths of the ocean, one wave after another. Some twisted flesh and blood even floated to the surface of the sea, merging with other similar existences along the way, as if trying to nurture something in this terrifying flower. But in the end, it still collapsed. At the very least, with the passage of time, the signs of life in the sea areas that the yacht passed through were quickly decreasing. How long had it been? The surroundings had already turned from a noisy uproar to dead silence. The evil eyes that had covered the surface of the sea earlier were long gone. Looking up, the night sky, the dark wind, the dark waves, and the filth filled everything. But even more than that, there was the destructive power that created all of this, dominating everything on a level that no one could understand. Zhang Yingying was a little absent-minded. She subconsciously hugged her boss's arm tighter, forgetting to ask how they should deal with that lucky bull ghost. At this moment, Meng Chong, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. Something is coming up. Where? The bottom of the yacht is climbing upwards. Meng Chong hesitated for a moment before he found a relatively accurate verb to describe it. Zhang Yingying's spiritual sensing range was mainly for highly threatening targets and living things, similar to dynamic vision. Her other areas were more ordinary. Even if she was reminded, she could only vaguely sense it, and the angle of the bottom of the yacht was rather awkward. She couldn't see it if she tilted her head. But this wasn't a problem for Zhang Yingying. She simply released the floating camera and let this little thing fly down to extend her vision. A second later, Zhang Yingying regretted it. Because with the outstanding night vision of the floating camera, she could clearly see that there was actually a layer of membrane formed from blood and flesh. It spread all the way up the bottom of the yacht, as if it wanted to completely wrap up the high-speed hull and swallow it in one fell swoop. This layer of flesh and blood, which was still flowing with blood and flesh juice, was definitely pieced together from the broken remains of countless sea creatures. But what kind of monster would they be pieced together? Boss. Zhang Yingying's voice was a little out of tune. Her Majesty Empress Wu patted the back of her hand. What are you afraid of? It's not like it's targeting us. Then who is it targeting? Her Majesty Empress Wu smiled. There was already no need to answer. Roars came from below. The bull ghost, who had just caught its breath on the lower deck, felt as if its back was on fire. It began to crazily move its limbs again, hoping to adjust its posture so that it could climb to the upper deck of the yacht again. But at this time, its body, which had been as light as a feather, was completely dragged down by its bloated belly. It struggled to get up with its 8 legs facing the sky. But the membrane of flesh and blood was advancing at an astonishing speed. In a few breaths, it had quickly crept over the railing of the yacht, stuck to the lower deck, and approached the bull ghost. Zhang Yingying's eyelids twitched a few times. She watched the membrane of flesh and blood, of an indescribable color, start to swell and extend. It felt like an amoeba that had been magnified billions of times. It kept changing its shape, extending pseudopodia, and formed an encirclement structure to hunt. Its prey was undoubtedly the bull ghost. Seeing that it couldn't escape, the bull ghost actually let out a scream that sounded like a human's. But what use was it? Before the scream ended, it had already been stuck to the part of the membrane of flesh and blood that had extended out. First it was its 2 limbs, then its back before it was completely wrapped up. It was like a fat spider that had been tangled to death by a spider's web. It looked absurd and desperate. The membrane of flesh and blood was so powerful that the bull ghost's entire body was constricted and deformed. It seemed like it could explode at any time and then melt its broken limbs and flesh inside. Her Majesty Empress Wu still had no intention of intervening. Zhang Yingying felt that she was really going to have a nightmare tonight. Before she could let her imagination run wild, on the lower deck, a ghostly fluorescence suddenly increased in brightness. It instantly broke through the bull ghost's flesh and even the obstruction of the membrane of flesh and blood, and blossomed in the void. It exploded. Zhang Yingying subconsciously narrowed her eyes, but she couldn't help but look. Fortunately, she did, because what happened next was completely different from what she had imagined. After the cluster of ghostly green fluorescence really broke through the obstruction of the flesh and blood, the severe dizziness from before was greatly alleviated. It was so much so that people on the upper deck could already see that the fluorescence itself was actually highly differentiated. It seemed like countless fireflies had gathered in one place. It was just that it lacked intelligence, and overall, it was rather orderly. Most importantly, the spots of fluorescence were even extending in both directions, stretching out into even finer lines. One end continued to expand and differentiate, while the other end continued to gather and shrink. At first glance, it looked like a forest that had been invisible before but was now gradually disappearing. The branches and leaves were luxuriant, but the main trunk wasn't very obvious. It was completely hidden among the branches and leaves that were constantly branching off. Or perhaps the lower half, including the root system, was still hidden behind the void. Because of such a change, the membrane of flesh and blood that was closing in was more or less distracted. Some of them even began to melt by themselves. Or was it trying to reshape it into a more suitable structure? In any case, the misfortune of the bull ghost exploding and dying was somewhat delayed, but the screams became even louder. What on earth is this thing? Zhang Yingying felt that her memory had been offended. It looks a little familiar. No, I don't think I've seen this thing before. But who have I heard of it before? She turned her gaze to Her Majesty Empress Wu, but unexpectedly, a voice came from behind her. Mr. Luo mentioned it before. It's a plant type. Ha! Meng Chong's response caught Zhang Yingying off guard. Meng Chong was very confident. At the end of last year, when Mr. Luo and the Order of Justice's secret-bound high priest, Li Taixing, met, he raised this extremely sharp conclusion. At that time, he compared the Ring of Blood and Will to the Order of Justice's Scales of Truth system. He said that the former was a tool type that was shaped like the abyss, while the Order of Justice's system was like a large tree that was planted in the abyss, but its roots continued to extend downwards. It was a biological type or plant type. Ah, I have an impression when you say this. Cloud City Water Village, right? Was it before or after Sister Moya's concert? As her memories flowed back, Zhang Yingying was truly shocked. Do you have to be so exaggerated? I was there at that time, but I don't remember it as clearly as you do. Matters that have nothing to do with us become chaotic. Meng Chong bowed slightly to hide his somewhat bitter smile. Mr. Luo's comparison of tool type and plant type hit quite a few secret order sore spots. As for the matter of Lady Halder and Yin Lu being remotely monitored through a puppet, there was no need to mention it. Zhang Yingying chuckled. He just loves to do these kinds of jobs that destroy people's bowls. Oh, according to what you're saying, this boss Niu Gui is an important member of some secret order? Perhaps not just that. Judging from Niu Gui's current state, he looks quite familiar to me. Meng Chong made a rare self-mocking remark. He explained further, this thicket is somewhat like the embryonic form of the abyss's solidified configuration. It also seems like a carrier for the Order's sacrificial vessel. But no matter what, this is definitely the crystallization of some belief system. It is the result of many years of accumulated faith. Through it, the core information of an order, including the characteristics of their faith, their fundamental techniques, their various levels of believers, all of it will be exposed without a doubt. The premise is that they must be able to perfectly break through and resist the backlash. Take my order as an example. This kind of crystallization isn't unique, but there is only one backup. If it is damaged or lost, it will truly be a serious injury to the bones. It will greatly damage our vitality. Of course, these are just the special characteristics of our idealistic order. As for the divine order, I don't dare to speak carelessly. Meng Chong thought of the human-faced arachnid when he said these words. The embryonic sacrificial vessel and the shepherd's imprint were lost in Xia City. He also thought of Elder Mo Luan. Of course, this also included Luo Nan. There were some matters that really couldn't withstand pondering, but the passage of time made pondering over them meaningless. Zhang Yingying didn't know how complicated Meng Chong's state of mind was. She discussed the matter as it stood and immediately gave Niu Gui the final verdict. I've finally figured it out. Why was this brother able to attract so much trouble? She blinked her eyes as she spoke to this point. She turned around and sent a flattering smile. Boss, can you give me some guidance? Chapter 1004. Her Majesty Empress Wu's gaze did not move in the direction of the Niu Gui or the fluorescent trees at all. Instead, it was cast towards the dark, distant sea. It wasn't until Zhang Yingying began to shake her arm that she raised the corner of her lips slightly. I have no opinion on other people's trophies. It's just that if we want to snatch it completely, we might still have a chance. Don't be so cold. Why did Zhang Yingying want Her Majesty Empress Wu to open her mouth? Wasn't it because she wanted to take the opportunity to have Her Majesty Empress Wu intervene and quickly end this crazy battle? However, just as she was about to use the power of the 12th layer of the great art of acting spoiled, her heart suddenly tightened. Relying on her own mental sensing ability, Zhang Yingying couldn't sense too many details. She could only vaguely sense that the dual pressure that came from the material and mental planes had somehow turned into some kind of highly concentrated jet stream that suddenly streaked past her. Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. The jet stream that streaked past was actually more like a long whip lashing through the void. It didn't really hit anyone, but just the loud whip flower and the whistling impact it brought could make people feel the heavy destructive power. In the frame of body and soul, the white rainbow hummed softly in response, but it was much slower. If he really wanted to target her, he would probably be dead by now. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but shiver. There was no doubt that this was a threat. For a moment, she thought that she had become a hostage. But she was aware of it. However, when he thought about Her Majesty Empress Wu beside him, he felt that it was unlikely. Zhang Yingying turned to look at her boss, but the latter had no intention of comforting her. As a matter of fact, Zhang Yingying couldn't help but follow his line of sight and look up at the sky. Only then did she realize that the dark clouds in the sky, which were almost pressing down on the surface of the sea, had unknowingly revealed a long, deep crack. The crack extended for an unknown distance, as if the entire sky had been torn in half. The trail of the long scar was right above her head. Zhang Yingying was in a daze for a moment before she realized that the long scar that tore through the clouds was parallel to the current route of the yacht. It could be seen that the clouds on both sides were surging violently, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't cover up this scar. With a few more glances, one could vaguely see the purer sky above the clouds. Did he have the strength but nowhere to use it? Zhang Yingying couldn't help but complain. She didn't even need to think to know that this kind of tyrannical impact, which was highly threatening to the passengers on the yacht, was definitely the enemy's method. A threat was a threat. At the very least, this kind of method was clearly understood. The flower of flesh and blood feast in the surrounding waters really left people speechless. Found you. The strong will crosses the entire sea surface, interrupting Zhang Yingying's wild imagination. It also puts a lot of pressure on her. Every will that has taken shape here is like the heat flow from the eruption of a volcano in the sea. It is so ferocious that a few muffled thunders explode in the atmosphere, shaking people's lips a little numb. The bulkheads of the yacht produced a very clear resonance effect, so much so that the entire hull seemed to be humming. There were already very few creatures on the surface of the sea, and all of them were shivering in the deeper waters. If Her Majesty Empress Wu wasn't by her side, Zhang Yingying felt that she wouldn't be any better. Speaking of which, these words sounded fierce, but in most movies and television works, weren't these flags raised by the great villains? Oh my, I've been discovered by you. Hee hee, this line wasn't anything good. In any case, the air fluctuated slightly as the familiar will and voice rang out. Luo Nan, who had disappeared for a long time, reappeared. It was unknown where he came from, but he finally appeared on the lower deck next to Niu Gui, who had already been wrapped in a film of flesh and blood. It looked like Luo Nan didn't look any different from before. He even turned half his body to greet the three people on the top deck. Zhang Yingying gave him a middle finger in response without a trace of politeness. This was especially true when she saw that the film of flesh and blood, which nearly covered the entire lower deck, didn't react at all when faced with a new target. The film even slowly shrank back. She felt more and more that this middle finger could be jabbed a few more times. Niu Gui's screams became even more miserable. At this time, Luo Nan was on the surface of the sea outside of the deck, roughly 50 meters away from the yacht. The pitch-black waves suddenly rose up, forming a rough mold in a state that severely violated the laws of nature. Enormous amounts of seawater rose up high and flowed down. It was independent of the natural form of the ocean, forming a waterfall wall. Or perhaps it was a screen, or a relief sculpture. The seawater on the wall was still in the form of seawater. It flowed endlessly, and it even formed an exchange with the scouring waves, forming lines and silhouettes that were constantly changing. It looked like everything, yet it didn't look like anything. Perhaps it's because there's a glowing evil eye embedded in the wall. It's not in line with the human aesthetic standards? The waterfall wall continued to flow along with the surging seawater. It wasn't any slower than the high-speed yacht, and it looked extremely smooth. Strictly speaking, after Her Majesty Empress Wu let go, the yacht's smoothness as it passed through the waves could no longer compare to this waterfall wall. In short, this was certainly the carrier of some formidable power. It belonged to the coward that Her Majesty Empress Wu spoke of. It was an extraordinary so powerful that it made one's liver tremble. The purpose of its appearance didn't seem to be to strut around, but to attempt to communicate with Luo Nan. The telepathic thought that spanned across the void was as tyrannical as before, but it had a source. It was emitted from the waterfall wall. This had no meaning in terms of efficiency, but perhaps it was a form of face-to-face respect? This respect was even reflected in the basic expression, "Give it to me, and we'll be friends." The image of the so-called "it" appeared on the waterfall wall at the same time the telepathic thought was delivered. It was like a master artisan relief sculpture that struggled to break out of the wall. It had the head of a cow and the body of a spider. It was none other than the cow ghost. Luo Nan didn't say anything, but Zhang Yingying secretly rolled her eyes. She wasn't sure about anything else, but one thing was clear. There was a problem with this person's ability to express himself. Was this a token of love? Zhang Yingying's thoughts were flying, and Luo Nan's thoughts were quite jumpy as well. He replied in an incongruous manner, "Our hobbies are a bit similar." Only those who were familiar with Luo Nan could tell that he was referring to sketches and relief sculptures. They were both part of the plastic arts. The other side was certainly stupefied. Zhang Yingying covered her face with her hands. She felt that if these two were to continue talking, a great battle would certainly break out. But looking at it from another angle, it seemed that Luo Nan's mood was a lot more relaxed than before. Sure enough, after venting in a perverted manner, there would be positive emotional feedback? Reality seemed to verify Zhang Yingying's conjecture. Following Luo Nan's off-key response, the height of the waves instantly surged to the side of the yacht by 3 to 5 meters. It felt as if the waterfall wall above them was going to be thrown over and crush the yacht. As for the telepathic thought that was already sufficiently tyrannical, it became even more restless. It was to the point that Zhang Yingying needed to rein in her mind and do her utmost to avoid contact in order to avoid suffering from the backlash. "Hey, do you really want to shed all pretense of cordiality?" Luo Nan wasn't anxious at all. Right now your fulcrums are becoming fewer and fewer. It's not too convenient to project power from a long distance, right? 1, 2, both are fine. Yes. I believe that even if there are only 1 or 2 fulcrums left, it's still enough for you to toss and turn about like a tsunami. And you absolutely have the ability to protect 1 or 2 fulcrums. But if you do this, you'll expose too many traces and clues. You're the one who's exposed. Oh, I admit it. You found that thing inside the mist, and you even injured it. You cut it in half. You're ruthless enough. But I've decided to forgive you. This is because thanks to you, I just discovered that its importance isn't as important as I thought it was. The expression of Luo Nan's fake body was rich. Well, Zhang Yingying couldn't see it, but the movements of his body were extremely natural. Even though she clearly knew that it was fake, she couldn't find any unreal feeling from watching it collapse. On the contrary, Zhang Yingying, who was familiar with Luo Nan, could hear the overly exaggerated flavor of Luo Nan's tone of conversation. It was a bit like he was imitating a big shot from a movie. The current Luo Nan could basically beat all the powerful characters in movies and television works. Zhang Yingying's gaze swept over the surrounding sea, and her eyelids twitched a few times. Yes, the murder cases under his hands were enough. After some careful thought, it was quite a good match. Luo Nan didn't know that Zhang Yingying was giving him the title of Big Boss Butcher behind his back. Right now he was quite used to this attitude. He extended a hand, and his finger drew a few lines in the air that had unknown meanings. The lines faced the waterfall wall not too far away. "Buddy, you've already used too much strength. The transmission trajectory is very clear. It's true that it's quite far, but do you want to make a bet? Let's have another long-range battle. It doesn't matter who wins or loses. I'll personally pay a visit to the 3rd round of attacks." Bang! A muffled explosion of air exploded from Luo Nan's fingertips. The lines he had drawn just now had exploded once more. This time there was an improvement. His finger was saved. Luo Nan laughed. He finally stopped teasing Niu Gue. This time he grasped the main point. He pointed at the struggling and howling Niu Gue by his feet. Aren't you just interested in this fellow? It just so happens that I'm quite interested as well. We've already researched this before. Your eyes are wide open, but why do I feel that your analytical abilities aren't quite good enough? If you really could do it, then you wouldn't have followed him all the way here, and it would have been my turn to do it. I can do it much better than you. Luo Nan extended his hand and brushed past Niu Gue's body as he spoke. There was an illusory thicket glowing with a dim light. He didn't know why, but the brightness over there had clearly exploded by a level. I feel that we can be a bit more honest. Actually, I'm not one to keep things to myself. If I can share something, I definitely won't be stingy. Everyone, please cooperate. I'll cooperate. I'll cooperate. An indistinct yet resounding scream exploded next to Luo Nan's feet. Luo Nan, who had the demeanor of a big boss, nearly gave it a kick. Zhang Yingying's cry of surprise represented the feelings of practically everyone present. Holy crap! It can talk! Chapter 1005. The one who spoke human words and took the initiative to surrender was none other than the flesh-skinned Niu Gue. He had already been forcefully wrapped in the membrane of flesh and blood, and he had squeezed out the belief system crystal from his stomach. Right now, his 8 limbs were about to be severed once more. It seemed that he was more worried about his legs that were about to be severed. Zhang Yingying's curiosity was about to explode. The hovering camera immediately rushed over and fiercely took pictures. She wanted to let Niu Gue speak a few more words, but she didn't know if the fellow's brain was damaged from fear or something. He only said the 3 words, "I'll cooperate," over and over again. The rest of his words reverted back to a muffled howl. He can't just say these 3 words, right? Zhang Yingying's train of thought took off once more. Then what kind of life did he lead before? Luo Nan's communication with the coward was interrupted by Niu Gue's sudden voice. However, the attention of the 2 sides in the communication was naturally focused on this target, which could be considered the core of the problem. Luo Nan's actions were fine, but the evil eye that was faintly discernible within the flow of water on top of the waterfall wall several dozen meters away flourished with radiance in this instant. The radiance shone directly over, reflecting the intense intentions of Niu Gue. It's useless. I couldn't even deal with the parasite when it moved to the side, let alone now. Of course, this is a good change. Being able to communicate means that I can absorb information more comprehensively and make judgments. Luo Nan's hand cut through the tree of nothingness above Niu Gue once more. It was like a magician's work. This time, the dense fluorescence of the tree of nothingness dimmed once more. Its state of light seemed to be completely under Luo Nan's control. In this darkest state, an even more substantial chain of light shot out from Luo Nan's fingertip. It was like the most dazzling of lightning. It pierced through the branches of the thicket, then vanished without a trace. It was dazzling yet brief. Zhang Yingying watched Luo Nan perform his magic. She was about to see an illusion. She felt that the disappearance of the lightning did not seem to be extinguished. Instead, it seemed to have penetrated the barrier of the void and penetrated all the way from the treetop area to the root area hidden behind the void and penetrated even deeper. If this was a hallucination, then it was certainly Meng Chong's fault. The source was Luo Nan. The description of the plant type was bizarre and garrulous. It made one's imagination run wild. However, in the next moment, the bull ghost, who was still howling, suddenly felt his throat choking. He couldn't even spit out a complete syllable. Soon, his breathing became difficult, and his already huge bull eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Zhang Yingying thought that Luo Nan was going to make a move on Niu Gue because the membrane of flesh and blood was strangling him. But when she looked at it again, she realized that this wasn't the case. This thought was completely unreasonable. This time she was completely confused. Fortunately, Luo Nan withdrew his hand after a mere second. This allowed Niu Gue to catch his breath, and Luo Nan gave a simple explanation. After a deep segmentation of the system, the symptoms of rejection are quite obvious. The upper and lower pathways are not smooth. There are problems with its information-carrying capacity and adaptive ability. It doesn't seem like it often interacts with its believers. But it's very strange that it was able to cultivate to this extent. There's some room for research here, but it seems like you can't do it. Luo Nan was referring to the coward, but Zhang Yingying's heart felt stifled. She rolled her eyes and simply adjusted herself to the level of a brainless spectator to avoid being caught in the crossfire. The coward didn't immediately respond. The glow of the evil eye on the wall of waterfall above the sea dimmed. It looked like the most unfortunate one was still the bull ghost. His declaration of surrender was completely useless. Instead, his body, which had already been forcefully wrapped and shrunk, looked like it had been stripped of water. It became much more shriveled. For a time, he couldn't even scream. He just lay on the deck and gasped for breath. The yacht was still moving at high speed, and the wall of waterfall on the sea followed them the entire way. However, the communication between them was suddenly cut off. Was it probably weighing the pros and cons? Reality didn't give the other side too much time to think. A wave of rumbling thunder suddenly crushed down from the sky above the clouds that had been forcefully severed. This wasn't the sound of thunder, but the sound of a supersonic fighter flying past. However, what attracted the attention of the people here was the tyrannical and exuberant blood energy over there. Could it be that the extraordinaries from D City had arrived? They were really fast. Zhang Yingying subconsciously turned her head to look at Her Majesty Empress Wu. The latter shook her head and pulled her arm out from Zhang Yingying's embrace. She turned around and left. Hey, boss. Her Majesty Empress Wu didn't respond, but her meaning was very clear. There were already 4 powerful extraordinaries in this area. What was the point of continuing to confront each other? There was no need to say anything. They definitely wouldn't be able to fight. Sure enough, the tyrannical intent of the coward that stretched across the surrounding sea began to subside. Correspondingly, the clouds in the sky clearly became a lot livelier. They began to gradually fill in the gaps in the center. However, what needed to be expressed had to be expressed. Words that needed to be said certainly wouldn't be missed. I'll keep an eye on you. Tell me that we're friends. Perhaps we'll drink a toast to our friendship very soon. It really wasn't easy. Big Brother Luo had established his persona. There was no more response from the other side. Only the evil eye on the waterfall wall was completely extinguished. Then the needed seawater scattered, striking the surface of the sea with a rumble. Luo Nan let out a breath. Before he could jump out of his persona, a fighter jet painted in matte gray pierced out from the depths of the clouds. It was less than 100 meters away from the surface of the sea. It whistled past the yacht diagonally. In the end, it even flapped its wings. Only the heavens knew what it meant. The fighter jet revealed itself for a moment. Then it flew into the depths of the ocean without looking back. Looking at its direction, it seemed to be going the same way as the yacht. Who's this? Big Brother Luo instantly turned into a curious baby. He turned his head to look for Zhang Yingying for an answer. Zhang Yingying could only shrug in response. It must be said that the yacht's speed was quite fast. After a few twists and turns, the yacht had completely left the most desperate part of the sea. That was if the membrane of flesh and blood that still wrapped around half of the hull of the yacht was discounted. The situation eased up, and her thoughts inevitably entered a complicated state. Zhang Yingying thought about the origin of this membrane and connected it with the controller. Her entire person felt bad. Seeing that Luo Nan had the intention to come over and talk, she simply waved out her Baihong. Clean it up for me before you come up. My yacht, you bastard. The violent winds and huge waves began to subside. The gathered marine life forms were practically wiped out. The membrane of flesh and blood completely retreated back into the sea. The lower deck of the yacht became as clean as if a dog had licked it clean. At least that was what it looked like on the surface. Zhang Yingying's mind was strong. She took this as the truth for the time being. She stepped onto the deck and didn't feel anything. But when she got closer to Luo Nan, she couldn't help but reach out and pinch the young face that still had a bit of childishness to it. She sized him up carefully. How come I never saw that you had such a perverted trait before? Don't mention the matter of an operational error. Luo Nan directly turned his face incorporeal, breaking away from Zhang Yingying's grip. But this sort of method was tantamount to hammering another nail into his perverted template. Zhang Yingying wanted to roll her eyes again. The number of sanitary balls she released today could probably prevent cockroaches from growing on the yacht for the next 10 years. Moo moo moo. It's alive! The Nyogue on the deck broke free of the membrane of flesh and blood at this time. The pain from the deformation of its body eased and it was finally able to return to its original position. It lay on the deck with its 8 legs propped up and its chest and abdomen stuck to the ground. This made it feel as if it had been reborn. It let out a loud cry of praise. Luo Nan, Zhang Yingying, and Meng Chong all shifted their gazes over to focus fire on its deformed body. In an instant, the Nyogue's body was forced down by at least half a meter. It was practically stuck flat to the deck. Only the Nyogue's head was slightly raised. It squeezed out a smile that was extremely recognizable to humans. Rather than calling it a Nyogue, it was more like a flattering dog. It looked absolutely willing to let it lie on the deck and lick the food. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but grumble. The secret orders should all be crying, right? Meng Chong. Luo Nan's gaze was actually on the tree of nothingness floating around the Nyogue's body. The Nyogue was quite intelligent. At the very least, it understood the principle of having a lover's wealth arousing suspicion. It simply flashed the most valuable thing on its body, allowing Luo Nan to do as he pleased. What do you think? Zhang Yingying asked for Luo Nan's opinion on how to deal with it. Luo Nan grunted, but he didn't immediately respond. But the more Luo Nan acted like this, the more the Nyogue, who was lying on the deck, began to tremble. Its previous attitude of loud praise had completely disappeared. Only its 8 limbs remained, and the lower ends of its limbs struck the deck amidst trembling. They clattered as if they would fall apart at any moment. Meng Chong simply turned his head to look at the sky. Zhang Yingying blinked her eyes. She cooperatively changed the topic. The boss just sent word. Blood Demon wants to see you. Blood Demon? Luo Nan finally remembered the name of this extraordinaire. Not too long ago, their group of people had been discussing the inexplicable operation of this extraordinaire's purchase of Cards magazine. Soon he came to a realization. The one who flew over just now was him, right? Yeah, that's right. He wants to discuss a business deal with you. He said that he has a card that you'll definitely be interested in. Right now, he's going to Koro base first. The boss agreed on your behalf. He said that this guy is an expert gambler, and you don't lack luck. This is also a part of diplomacy. Smart. Actually, Luo Nan wanted to ask Her Majesty Empress Wu who the coward was. Though he already had some guesses, wouldn't it be better to just look at the standard answer? All right. The boss said a long time ago that this fellow is your spoils of war. How to deal with him is up to you. Luo Nan casually said, Can I just throw him off the ship? Let him convey some goodwill to Brother Coward? Do as you wish. Moo moo moo. Nyogue immediately howled. His trembling sharp limbs nearly pierced through the deck. Then he frantically displayed his talent for language. Keep me. Keep me. I'm valuable. I have a card. Luo Nan laughed. Just based on the card you used to run away with the money? Nyogue was stunned. Big Boss Luo took advantage of the situation to come online. Lord Dark Dragon God, everyone in the Great Swamp Order will probably perform a mass disembowelment if they see you like this, right? Or maybe I can use you to negotiate a price with Matsudaira Yoshio. Don't. Please don't. A muffled boom rang out. This time, the lower deck was really pierced through. Nyogue didn't care about Zhang Yingying's furious glare. He raised his bull head and continued to ram it, wailing and begging for mercy. Matsudaira Yoshio died a long time ago. Right now, there's a demon over there. A demon. Chapter 1006. Night had just fallen in Osaka, and the hustle and bustle had yet to subside. The trading center in the trade zone had already stopped trading. However, a large number of trading companies, public relations companies, research institutes, design institutes, and other white-collar places still adhered to the tradition of working overtime. Whether there was a problem or not, they had to show their attitude first. Of course, the night banquet had already been arranged. The night cruise on Beishan Lake was quite a popular way to make friends recently. Taking a boat, drinking, going to the other side, and then taking the subway and bus home. Time was really calculated to the extreme. The entire trade market was flowing with a floating and restless atmosphere. However, all of this had nothing to do with Jiang Zhong. She was wearing the white lab coat, sitting in front of the workbench, sorting out the experiment records of the day and combining them with the massive experimental records of the past for analysis and verification. This was a research that had been going on for 27 years. The project was established in 2070. In 75 years, she participated as an assistant. In 81 years, she officially took over. Since then, she had been busy. The best years of her youth, the most beautiful years, and the most ups and downs of her life were all integrated into it. Now, she was over 40 years old. For most researchers, it was about time for them to make some achievements, and she did have some achievements. However, in this main project, although there were occasional ups and downs, overall, it was still the same smooth line when she first took over. There was no trend of big ups and downs. At least, according to the standards of experimental design, this was correct. Zhang Zhong was not impatient. Even if she had such emotions before, they had long been polished over the past 20 years. Sometimes she even thought that maybe she would continue this research until she was 100 years old. Then she would retire and hand it over to her children and students to continue. If there was such a day, her life would be considered happy, right? The other sounds of the research institute gradually subsided, but Zhang Zhong did not sense it. She just focused on the work in front of her. In the past 2 days, her workload on this project had increased a little. She needed to add the tissue sample of the mushed mouth ape that Mr. Mo promised to give in a few days. She needed to do some pre-design, especially to set up a warning line. Even though there had been nearly 10 million iterations, every time a tissue sample of a strong mutant was added, it would cause a violent reaction to the mutant gene network that was already in an unstable state. This was a moment to test the ability of the researchers. Ding! The sound of glassware hitting against each other rang in her ears. Zhang Zhong was completely unprepared. He was so shocked that his body trembled and he turned around in panic. First, he saw the red wine bottle and glass, then Matsudaira Yoshio's thin face. After not seeing him for a while, he seemed to have become more and more unkempt. His beard was unshaven, and his suit was loose. If you saw him on the street, you would think that he was a former employee who had been fired by some company. Of course, anyone with the slightest bit of experience would absolutely not underestimate this cold and firm gaze of his. Zhang Zhong was a little surprised. Although this person was a big boss, he rarely appeared in the research institute, let alone now. You. Drink some red wine to soften your blood vessels and celebrate. Matsudaira Yoshio ignored Zhang Zhong's half-completed experimental design interface and directly placed the wine bottle in the projection work area. It was a very impolite behavior, but it was natural for him to do it. You're still using that excuse. Zhang Zhong knew that with Matsudaira Yoshio's personality, he most likely would not be able to get anything done tonight. He lowered his head and smiled. It's hard to imagine that you used to introduce sake to everyone you met. What is it to celebrate? Matsudaira Yoshio casually pulled out the cork and poured some wine into 2 tall glasses. To celebrate the change in direction of the blood vessel platform. Hundreds of research institutes and thousands of projects in the peaceful trade market lost their subsidies and died immediately. But we are not among them. As soon as Zhang Zhong took the glass, he was slightly stunned. The negotiation is over? It's just an announcement. LCRF has always been like this. Matsudaira Yoshio smiled and swirled the glass like a veteran, but his eyes did not stop on the wine or the glass. Instead, he looked at Zhang Zhong. Since a large number of projects died, the popularity of the projects that survived naturally increased. The price of the directional induction technology has increased again. Congratulations! Zhang Zhong thought he understood, but he only smiled calmly and raised his glass to Matsudaira Yoshio. It was as if she did not realize that it was the result of her own research, and also the main direction of her research institute. Since she had given it to him, she knew what to do. Matsudaira Yoshio did not stand on ceremony. He said, "Thank you," and drank the wine in his glass in one gulp. Zhang Zhong was not good at drinking, but she was even worse at rejecting others. She also drank a mouthful. Although Matsudaira Yoshio had specially brought red wine over, he was not particular about it at all. Zhang Zhong was the same. The two of them began to drink with each other. In the past few years, although Zhang Zhong rarely came to Sakura, every time she did, Matsudaira Yoshio would find time to drink and chat with her. Most of the time they were on the yacht. Now that the yacht had been sold, it did not matter if they stayed in the laboratory. Frankly speaking, in such an atmosphere, women often had more considerations than men. Jiang Zhong even had that awareness. But all these years, her old friend had always been like this, so she had nothing more to say. Jiang Zhong sat on the chair, and Matsudaira Yoshio sat on the laboratory floor. The two of them talked about the blood vessel platform and LCRF. They talked about some technical aspects, but it was Matsudaira Yoshio who gave his comments. Life cultivation under the chaos mechanism. LCRF is going to throw money in this area again. They are completely dancing with others now. Those old men have already lost their basic judgment. They have the best resources, but they are being played in the palm of their hands. It's ridiculous that people are dying. Jiang Zhong drank a few mouthfuls of wine. Her pale cheeks were slightly red, and she felt like laughing. It sounds really worth celebrating. Matsudaira Yoshio laughed out loud. In the end, he asked her, "What about you? Aren't you interested in a sum of money?" Matsudaira Yoshio glanced at the virtual workspace that had entered the low-light standby mode. Your distributed ecosystem network is actually very compatible. No. Jiang Zhong's answer was resolute. Never. Then don't. Matsudaira Yoshio was even more straightforward. Jiang Zhong was a little surprised. That's it? What else can you do? A considerable part of this research relies on your dissociation ability. If you are not willing, there is nothing else to say. However, I know that you will refuse, but I still want to tell you because there is one thing that you should know. With your dissociation ability, theoretically speaking, you might have a substitute tool. After drinking, Jiang Zhong's brain nerves were a bit sluggish. She did not react for a time. She just looked over in a daze. Matsudaira Yoshio looked down from a high vantage point. He looked at her blankly, looking up, and laughed involuntarily. Isolation is the enemy of research. But it's understandable. After all, you are not a person of the circle. You don't know what is the hottest thing in the inner world right now. That son of Luo Zhongheng is a treasure boy, but he is also a super troublemaker. The symptom he took out has already caused an earthquake in the field of extraordinary research. Symptom. Jiang Zhong's eyes widened. Yeah. It's the one that's working overtime in the factory. Matsudaira Yoshio played it down. He was really just making small talk. I'll give you a live recording later. You can study it and see if there are any similarities or differences between it and dissociation. You can also speculate and see if he will develop similar effects in the future. Other people might be able to do it too. Jiang Zhong furrowed her brows. She thought hard for a few seconds. With great difficulty, she broke away from the complicated relationship between Mr. Mo and Luo Nan. She returned to the familiar level of research. She slowly nodded. If that's the case, then it's actually a good thing. He's much more generous than you. Of course, he has the strength, but you don't. Speaking of which, Luo Nan is one of the thickest thighs in the world right now. He's even stronger than me. Haven't you considered cooperating with him to continue this project? The thickest thighs. Jiang Zhong was clearly a bit moved. Does he have any research on the distributed ecological network? Matsudaira Yoshio laughed loudly. He laughed so hard that his voice was nearly hoarse. See, this is what women are like. Jiang Zhong pursed her lips. She endured it for 2 seconds. Finally, she also laughed. Her instinctive curiosity surged. Have you seen Luo Nan? The last time I saw him, he was still a little kid. Ah, I've seen him. Matsudaira Yoshio's smile faded a bit. I've done some research. Huh. The results of the research show that he doesn't look much like his parents. Luo Zhongheng is extremely intelligent. He radiates brilliance everywhere. After an unforeseen event, he becomes restrained and forbearing. Bo Qingwen is calm and rational. She's gentle and amiable normally. They don't look like each other. They really don't look like each other. Then, Professor Luo? Yes. He's most like old man Luo. Especially in the last few years. He's focused like a madman. He doesn't even recognize his own family. What crazy old man? Where's your manners? Jiang Zhong was a bit dissatisfied. You weren't like this before. Even the hot-blooded Matsudaira Yoshio has become a blabbermouth. You've changed a lot. I'm talking about old man Luo. You're the one who said crazy old man. I didn't. Zhang Zhong was indeed a bit tipsy. Matsudaira Yoshio continued to pour more wine for her. Don't try to defend yourself. In the last few years, even Qingwen Sis was thrown at by him. It was Luo Zhongheng who took the lead to shout. Ha! Only Yan Yongbua shouted it to his face. That's right. That little brat thinks too highly of himself. His heart is only the size of a needle tip. He's supported by his sense of superiority. If he doesn't have it, he'll collapse. It's really unfortunate for him to be called one of the 4 most beautiful men in the wilderness. Zhang Zhong laughed so hard at this unfunny description that she slumped over the table. 4 most beautiful men. That's right. During the annual gala, Yan Yongbua always wanted to steal the limelight. In the end, Luo Yuan tripped him up. He thought it was Luo Zhongheng, and he brooded over it for almost a year. Who asked Luo Zhongheng to be so smart at that time? Who else could he look for if not him? But Luo Yuan is too cunning. No, he's a cool guy. Except for his senior Qingwen, he doesn't recognize anyone. Zhang Zhong took the initiative to drink a mouthful of wine. She looked up at Matsudaira Yoshio's somewhat blurry face and giggled. So what if he doesn't recognize me? I still slept with him. Matsudaira Yoshio raised his eyebrows and raised his glass in admiration. He had nothing else to say. However, Zhang Zhong buried her face again. So we've reached the age where we reminisce about the past. Not at all. It's just that some things are worth remembering. Liar. The glass of red wine was quickly emptied. Zhang Zhong's alcohol tolerance wasn't good, especially tonight. He slumped over the table and fell asleep. Matsudaira Yoshio gently swirled the wine glass. A few drops of wine stuck to the side of the glass and swayed. His gaze was still fixed on Zhang Zhong. He quietly looked at his thin shoulders and messy hair, and the particularly dazzling strand of silvery white in between the hair. He frowned and stretched out his hand. With a skillful move, he plucked out the strand of white hair from its root and twirled it between his fingers. A few seconds later, the white hair seemed to have turned into a mercury-like liquid. It could no longer maintain its previous form and seeped into the skin of Matsudaira Yoshio's fingertips. Chapter 1007. By the time the sun hurried through the gaps between the clouds, casting its rays into the sea at a slight angle, the yacht Luo Nan and the others were on had already crossed the Tropic of Capricorn. Koror base was already in sight ahead. It was T-City time, May 16, 2097, around 10 in the morning. Compared to modern aircraft, even a high-speed yacht was far too slow. They traveled at top speed the entire way, but they still spent 17 to 18 hours to cross 2,000 kilometers of ocean surface. Of course, there were also the effects of encountering storms along the way, as well as man-made variables. There were only 10 hours left until the high seas auction. Koror base used to be the most important outpost base northeast of T-City. It was still the same. However, as the world government gradually entered a counteroffensive phase in the wilderness and even the ocean, the tight situation on the periphery was greatly alleviated. More and more commercial elements were slowly integrated into this formerly important military location. It was the area with the highest mercenary density in the world. It was the fishing area with the largest marine aberrations. It was the trading center with the highest frequency of transactions in the world for aberrations raw materials. It was also the place where the underground black market was the most rampant. All of these names belonged to T-City. But this Southwest Pacific Ocean hub formed from several hundred islands certainly had to contribute a considerable amount to this. Due to the strong business atmosphere, the area under the control of the military only covered the 2 largest islands, Sisu Island and Norsa Island. The hundreds of small islands in the Pacific Ocean that were scattered in the southeast were a paradise for merchants and explorers. They were in a highly free and disorderly state. The yacht cut a small arc and entered the archipelago area from the southeast. It sounded like several hundred small islands were a lot, but in the vast Pacific Ocean, the distance between islands was dozens or hundreds of kilometers. The yacht traveled through this area of the sea, occasionally seeing some undulating silhouettes that were slightly different from the sea and sky. However, compared to the vast ocean outside, the winds and waves in this area had stopped a long time ago. The clouds were slightly thick, and the sea surface was calm. It was a good time for fishing. The shadows of ships dotted the surface of the sea. This was a rarely seen scene in the vast ocean outside. It looked very leisurely. Sometimes, this place is more desolate than the wilderness. You can see a corpse in the wilderness, but if you throw it into the sea, you won't see anything. Oh! As the temporary tour guide, Zhang Yingying wasn't in a good state of mind. She kept yawning and was about to fall asleep on the railing. This was not simply because he did not sleep well. A considerable part of it was because he had witnessed the battle between the extraordinaries last night at such a close distance, which had damaged his mental state. This was what Her Majesty Empress Wu had said. In Zhang Yingying's opinion, it was mostly because she was having a hard time communicating with a certain minotaur. At this moment, the Lord Dark Dragon God was trying his best to curl himself into a ball and hide in the shadows between the deck and the cabin. Just by looking at the exposed half of its body, it really looked like a well-behaved baby cow. The problem was that Zhang Yingying didn't think so. This bro is good at acting dumb. I've never seen anyone act dumb until they become dumb. He didn't know anything. Other people are using it for experiments, but they don't even know what's happening to their bodies. Are you kidding me? The more you know, there's nothing wrong with this method. Luo Nan responded casually. Last night, Luo Nan and Niu Gui didn't really communicate much. Niu Gui's experimental mica had been destroyed by the coward. He needed to rebuild it, which took quite a bit of time. As for the soul cloak, he had a direct observation point of view following the gradual recovery of the soul cloak. This made it easier for Yin Lu to gather information. Listening to Niu Gui's revelation was fine. Why should he limit himself to just Niu Gui's words? Zhang Yingying was dominated by her gossipy nature. According to Niu Gui, the devil who pretended to be Matsudaira Yoshio used it as an experimental vessel to conduct some complex research. As for what he researched, belief system? Bamboo Pole should be quite fond of this. He's been doing research in this area for the past few years. Yes, I've seen Brother Bamboo Pole's thesis. Bamboo Pole's thesis cut into the perspective of the order's social hierarchy. As for this person, I feel like he also wants to become a god. Where did the word also come from? Luo Nan objected. The definition of God on Earth is too broad. Right now, it's just a few social experiments. For example, Mr. Devil. The Great Zay Order is an experimental environment set up by him. It's also a verification tool. TSK. You can even understand this Niu Gui's vague words? You'll understand better if you don't listen. Ha! Zhang Yingying wasn't an idiot. Luo Nan's words made her eyebrows stand up in an instant. She cast a sharp gaze over. Actually, her cultivation was a level lower than Niu Gui's. But wasn't there a saying about the fox and the tiger? Niu Gui, who was a bit away from them, subconsciously gave Zero a look. Niu Gui's face revealed a simple and honest smile. Luo Nan's conclusion had nothing to do with what Niu Gui had said. Most of it came from his own observations. At his level of knowledge, the ways of the world were a bit difficult. Some objective traces and clues could be seen at a glance. There really weren't any secrets to speak of. From the looks of it, the belief structure that Niu Gui brought out doesn't have too many traces of human intervention. At the very least, the fake Mr. Matsudaira Yoshio didn't do this. He seems to be more inclined towards verification on the level of reality. When I was in Ban City, I heard that he made the distortion laboratory flourish. If you really want to talk about intervention. Hey! Lord Dark Dragon God. Luo Nan turned his head and called out to Niu Gui from afar. Niu Gui propped himself up with a whoosh and crawled over. Mumu. Boss, you're too kind. Just call me Little Niu. I'm not picky about ghosty or whatever. Zhang Yingying rubbed her forehead. Meng Chong had long since hidden far away to avoid being unable to restrain his emotions and committing an honor killing. Luo Nan was calm and collected. From his perspective, Niu Gui wasn't simple and honest at all, even though he had the word Niu on him. Instead, the word ghosty was quite appropriate. Luo Nan didn't need to think too much about this fellow. You said that the fake Matsudaira Yoshio used extremely vicious methods on you, coercing you to do things for him. Yes, Mu. The abbot of the shrine became a puppet. A real puppet. I don't know what method was used to mold him, but he had to change every once in a while. And yet, you still managed to escape. You said that it was because the Amaterasu order wanted to make a move against you. Both sides interfered with each other, and they accidentally helped you escape. You can't explain the specifics. I really don't know. I really don't know. I don't understand that. We'll believe you for now. But you need to explain why you dared to contact them after you escaped. Why did you coerce the Great Marsh Order to sell ships and factories to support your expenses? I'm innocent. What expenses can I possibly have in my current state? Nyogue had a sullen expression. You can see it for yourself. I've been eating and sleeping in the open all this way. My meat has almost become salty from being soaked in the sea. What expenses can I possibly have? How can I have expenses? That fellow must have borrowed my name to resell the religious property. You're saying that he saw that you, his most important test subject, had run away, so he began to liquidate the business. He doesn't want to play anymore? That's right. That must be it? Nyogue's voice suddenly weakened. His voice was even wavering. Because at this moment, Luonan reached out and pressed his head. Luonan didn't use much strength. It was like a prayer from some religious sections. Or he might as well just pat his pet's head. Nyogue's hair was warm and a bit fluffy. It felt good to the touch. However, compared to Luonan, Nyogue's feelings were more direct and more indescribable. He was a bit confused at first. But soon, his head, shoulders, and even his entire body began to tremble uncontrollably. Especially when he saw Luonan's gaze. He couldn't discern the direction of his emotions. He couldn't control his reaction no matter what. Moo 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 moo. Let me add a few words. A strange feeling slowly seeped down from the top of his head before he could turn around. Yes, it was seeping. It was as if there was a cool air current that ignored the barrier between his scalp and his skull. It blew straight into his skull from the outside. It was also at this time that some debris fell from the top of its head. That texture. No matter what, Nyogue was still the dark dragon god that had been worshipped by people for many years. His perceptive abilities were very strong. After the initial panic, the situation above his head was naturally reflected in his mind. Moo. Horns. On top of his head, the pair of horns, which were approximately the length of an adult's palm, had inexplicably disintegrated. Not even a stubble was left behind. This was very normal. This was because the tendency of disintegration had never stopped. After disposing of the horns, it smoothly and naturally acted on his scalp and below. His skull had already begun to crackle. So there really was wind. The sea breeze had blown in. It had blown into his brain. Nyogue's entire body was trembling, but at the same time, it was as hard as a statue. His throat was completely unable to form a sentence. Only vague syllables leapt out and sprayed out along with snot and tears. Luonan let go of his hand, but the disintegration phenomenon that he had created was still continuing. Moreover, it steadily spread below Nyogue's skull. Zhang Yingying, who was next to him, had subconsciously held her breath. There are two reasons. Luonan raised two fingers in front of Nyogue's eyes. First, right now I'm pondering how to negotiate with people. As the saying goes, the business world is like a battlefield. I've fought a war before, but I'm still not too familiar with how to face the enemy at the other end of the negotiation table. It shouldn't be my problem that you took the initiative to jump in and play the role. Second, I just comprehended a new ability yesterday. I need an opponent to practice with. You're quite proactive here. I'll thank you first. If the control of the heat isn't too good, please understand. Chapter 1008. After entering the Tropic of Capricorn, the airflow on the Pacific Ocean was actually very warm. It was wrapped in abundant water vapor and lingered around the yacht. It also carried the aura of the creatures on the surrounding islands. In this kind of air, it should have been a very pleasant thing. But Nyogue didn't feel this at all, not at all. For it, Even the tiniest disturbance in the outside world was a demonic wind that could blow into its broken body and bring fatal infection and damage to it at any time. Or if the wind was a little stronger, it would be blown away. It was now completely overwhelmed by emotions, and nothing could be hidden, even the outline of a bull's head. Luo Nan comforted it. You don't need to worry too much. If nothing goes wrong, this new move of mine will maintain the structure of your survival system as much as possible. It will prepare for the subsequent magnetic bonding. Even if it's a little too small, doesn't your faith system crystal have the ability to repair it? At present, the illusory tree grove had indeed been temporarily placed back in Oxghost's abdomen. After all, there wasn't a better storage area than there, and it wasn't very bright during the day. The problem was that Nyogue did not feel comforted at all. At this moment, it couldn't help but think of the blooming flowers of flesh and blood in the violent winds and huge waves last night. To hell with maintaining the structure. What the F***ck was magnetic bonding. Among the hundreds of thousands of sea creatures on the surface of the sea last night, which one of them had a complete structure? And who would glue it back together? Oh, there's still the matter of adhesion. Do I have to become that flesh membrane that keeps spreading out? The soil that gave birth to fear was never just an imagination, but also the seeds of actual experience, as well as the fertilizer that had already been buried. The bull demon was truly terrified. Tears and mucus flowed down its face, and its body didn't dare to move. Only its 8 limbs scratched randomly on the deck. It wasn't doing this on purpose, but it was a reaction of losing control under extreme fear. But it was smart after all. It knew that no matter what, attitude was the most important thing right now. Hesitation would make everything go up in smoke. Therefore, it was almost ready to explode its head. It tore its throat and shouted, Boss, it's my fault. I'm lying. We have a tacit understanding and colluded with each other. Moo. Don't rush. Speak slowly. Luo Nan looked at Nyogue's tears and patted its thick shoulder to comfort it. I told you, the proficiency level for the new skill isn't high. Even the restoration process takes time. You're too nervous right now. Your brain is congested with blood. Nyogue gurgled. He didn't know whether he should speak or shut up. 2 seconds later, it was able to decipher what it needed to do from Luo Nan's eyes. It endured the fear of death, sobbing as it continued to speak. That imposter and I were in contact. At first, it was just a tacit understanding. I realized that he was doing something, but it didn't affect me. Later on, there were benefits. Zhang Yingying began to recover from the visual impact of the cow's head disintegrating layer by layer. In order to better adapt, she adjusted her breathing and interrupted. What is he doing? What did you get out of it? I really don't understand. I only know that it's some kind of directional induction. It's a technology that allows ordinary people to gain supernatural power through certain stimuli. Luo Nan interrupted it. This project has been going on in his private laboratory for a long time. The LCRF has also invested in it. That's just a part of it. I don't know the specifics, but it's done through my side. It's impossible to use the power of the faith system to induce and interfere with the members of the church, right? Luo Nan shook his head. Your Ban City's system of godhood already possesses this kind of effect. Is he looking for a donkey while riding a donkey while researching this? I didn't explain it clearly. What I mean is that the devil wants the induced supernatural power to be inherited through heredity. At the very least, he wants to achieve some kind of clear hereditary advantage. This is genetic research? Actually, it's not just the next generation. I'm guessing, just guessing. He wants to create a special gene, the kind that can be directly used on his own body. This is because other than researching the people of the order, he is also experimenting on his own body. It's just that the other people aren't as strong as him, and their luck isn't as good as his. You're saying that he failed a lot? What's the fatality rate like? Luo Nan recalled the information Yinle gathered regarding the Great Swamp Order, but his impression was already quite fuzzy. This vagueness in and of itself explained that there weren't any particularly unsightly things happening over there in recent years. Nyogue subconsciously became vague again. It's all right. The scale of his experiments isn't large. Luo Nan just looked at him, not saying a word. Zhang Yingying glanced at Luo Nan. Seeing that Luo Nan didn't express anything, she took the initiative to blush. She sneered and said, "Are you going to beat around the bush again? I haven't forgotten. You still haven't told me about the benefits you obtained. Don't think that you can muddle through with a few words of nonsense." "Moo, I moo. I. Are you very hungry?" Luonan suddenly spoke. "Ha. I'm saying that you're drooling. Did you think of something delicious?" "Moo, I'm fine. I'm fine." Luonan shook his head. "You crossed the Pacific Ocean, ate the wind and slept in the open, and you were targeted by extraordinaries. You've been in fear. It's been a long time since you've had a full meal, right? Do gods like you also need to eat? How am I a god? At most, I'm just a desolate soul. Please don't flatter me. Please don't." Nyogue clearly knew that the stubbornness of the disintegration in his head had already stopped. Even the tree of nothingness within his abdominal cavity had begun to output fluorescence in reverse to heal him. But when faced with Luonan's chatty words, Nyogue unconsciously began to shake. How could there be an idiot on this yacht? Zhang Yingying's eyes narrowed, her gaze sharp. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't a smile. "I understand now. Your real name is Nyogue, right? Come, pronounce this word after me." Flat tone. "Circle in circles." Nyogue's tongue was stiff. How could he have the strength to speak? Luonan shook his head. "I haven't researched the direction of Nyogue's nervous system and the secretion of glands, so I can't comment. However, a life system must be driven by desires in order to maintain its existence. It is quite obvious. You seem to have quite an appetite for those experimental subjects." Nyogue screamed miserably once more. He didn't care whether his head had recovered or not. He used his head to smash the ground, to smash the deck. His entire body threw itself to Luonan's feet. "I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. That devil must have exposed himself on purpose to let that stupid and old abbot of the shrine discover me. Forcing me to take a side is like a cat toying with a mouse. The Amaterasu order wants to incorporate all the so-called gods of Band City into the system of the Great Divine Treasury. They don't give us any way out at all. And those cowards of the Great Zay order are just waiting for death. I can't accept this. Boss. Yes, I'm still delusional enough to clear my name. But this is the effect of my undead sense of shame. It's howling in grief right now. Boss. Nyogue wailed loudly. Tears and snot flowed down his face. Zhang Yingying's floating camera could record this scene and he could participate in a performance competition. He might even win a prize. Zhang Yingying didn't say anything after the facts were clear. No matter what kind of actions Nyogue had committed, Luonan would be the one to decide how to deal with him. Moreover, it was clear that this Mr. Nyogue was hiding quite a few things in his stomach. "So you're admitting that you and that fake Matsudaira Yoshio are allies in a certain sense?" Luonan's tone was very calm. It seemed that he wasn't affected by Nyogue's actions at all. He was just stating the facts. "Since we're allies, did you get his permission to run away?" "Well, I ran away first and he didn't stop me. I thought that the Amaterasu order was really going to make a move." Nyogue's words were very vague, but it didn't seem like he was doing it on purpose this time. "And he even helped you raise money? Did he give you a suggested route or something? Isn't crossing the Pacific too tiring?" "Moo. I didn't want to come at first. I just wanted to circle around the islands and hide in the old continent. But the area around Band City was really too dangerous. The two from the Amaterasu order had their eyes and ears everywhere. I was almost caught halfway through. I could only ask him for help. He gave me a suggestion." "Oh." "He suggested that I take advantage of a luxurious cruise ship leaving the harbor to hitch a ride. The ship was of high standard. The Amaterasu order wouldn't go overboard in their search. It was relatively safe. I had no choice but to listen to him. I risked my life and stuck to the bottom of the ship. In the end, I came out without a hitch." "A luxurious cruise ship? Jade Light?" "Yes, Moo." Nyogue was about to cry again. "I originally thought that I would escape once I got out of the Amaterasu court sphere of influence. But I didn't expect that the Pacific Ocean would be so dangerous after I left Band City. If it weren't for the cruise ship I could rely on and the big guys avoided me, I would have become their meal long ago. It was hard to get off just like that. I followed the cruise ship intermittently for who knows how long. But in the end, I encountered a very powerful group of mutants. They clashed with the cruise ship. I couldn't keep up with them at the time, so I fell behind. Then I ran. It wasn't easy for me to catch my breath. Only then did I realize that I was near D City. Then I ran into something like this. When I saw Her Majesty Empress Wu, I thought I was saved. I really was saved. I was saved. Niu Gui rambled on. He had the tendency to expand his adventure into a long story. Zhang Yingying was curious. You know my boss? She had asked a similar question to Her Majesty Empress Wu last night. But she was brushed off by the insincere excuse of beauty and reputation. Niu Gui went, His eyeballs swiveled, and he began to stammer. Zhang Yingying looked at Luo Nan and shrugged. She didn't press him any further. Soon, she turned her head to look at the top deck. Her Majesty Empress Wu was drinking tea and reading under the awning. She certainly knew of the progress here, but she didn't say anything. As his subordinate, she had to know the severity of the situation. Luo Nan didn't have any intention of delving into this question. His gaze moved away from Niu Gui's humble face and turned to the still glimmering chest and abdomen. Have you been in contact with that ally? Chapter 1009. How is that possible? Niu Gui looked as if he had heard a fantasy story. This damned belief system. Maintaining a distance of 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers is the limit. Luo Nan didn't say anything else. He just looked at Niu Gui. Niu Gui swallowed his saliva and pretended to have accidentally stopped breathing. He hurriedly continued. Sometimes it's possible, but it's really difficult. I can't do it 7 or 8 out of 10 times when I take the initiative to contact him. What about him? It seems like the success rate isn't that high. Even if it is, the limit is 4,000 kilometers. It can radiate to the south of the equator. Luo Nan gave Niu Gui a lesson, who had already lost the concept of time and distance. Then he asked unhurriedly, You should be constantly asking him for help during your contact, right? Yes. Is it effective? It's not bad. So, can I say that it's all thanks to your ally? You're a mutant that isn't acclimatized to the climate. You were able to overcome countless hardships and dangers in a short 10 days to cross half of the Pacific Ocean and arrive near T City. My conclusion is that this is a very good online tour guide. Niu Gui's eyes widened. He was a bit absent-minded. Don't worry about it too much. There are many coincidences that are hard to explain. Just like the battleship slicing blade that chased you until you cried for your mom and dad, and the one behind it. As Luo Nan spoke, he extended his hand and touched the muscles and bones of Niu Gui's head that were beginning to heal. Niu Gui shuddered again. The reaction was quite big. However, it was hard to say how much of this reaction was due to the fear of death at hand and how much of it was due to the fear of an unknown conspiracy. Luo Nan wasn't going to give him an analysis. He was just discussing the matter as it stood. Right now, you're healing through the Dark Dragon God's belief system. Frankly speaking, you're fusing quite well with this system. Are those gods of Ban City on the same level as you? Or are you a special case of a win-win cooperation? Niu Gui went, for a long time, unable to answer. This kind of healing method is a bit slow. The risk of infection will increase. Plus, you probably won't be able to recover your horns. They look weird. If you agree, I can help you. No, there's no need. Niu Gui wished he could bang his head against the deck again to show that he was fine. Boss, your time is precious. I really can't trouble you. Besides, I can't bring you with me when I'm alive, and I won't take you with me when I'm dead. It's not a big deal even if I lose 2 horns. Zhang Yingying chuckled. He's helping you out of goodwill. If you don't give him face, he might flip out. Niu Gui didn't say anything. He just buried his head and pretended to be dead. Luo Nan lightly shook his head at Zhang Yingying, indicating that they shouldn't waste time on this fellow. Zhang Yingying was still a little resentful. This guy really needs to be taught a lesson. Haha, seems like he's already been taught a lesson. Yeah, We won't be able to get anything out of him. Actually, it wasn't too bad. For example, the details of the fake Matsudaira Yoshio's research, his personality traits when he wasn't hidden, and that great divine treasure system. All of them were extremely valuable. But Luo Nan's time was precious. He really wasn't in the mood to beat around the bush with this Mr. Bullpen. Moreover, this wasn't the main point of his current concern. The two of them did not avoid talking about Niu Gue. This brother was not worth avoiding. Luo Nan said, "There's one thing you're right about. You really need to clean up this person." Niu Gue raised his head in shock. It was so large that his skull, which was still in a softened and dispersed state, shook along with it. Then he saw Luo Nan extend his hand. Curls of water smoke accumulated and manifested in his palm. Soon, it coiled and condensed, transforming into an unfathomable ball of smoke. And it gradually became clear and transparent. From his angle, it seemed like he could faintly see the outline of the rippling body of water within. Luo Nan released his hand, and the ball of smoke, which was rapidly turning transparent, floated in the air. The effect was very fantastic. But from Niu Gue's perspective, it was clearly like a strange and enormous eyeball. It coldly stared at him. "Look, the yacht is about to reach the shore. You know that Koro Base is the most active trading market for marine mutants, right?" Luo Nan spoke to Niu Gue with the tone of a coaxing child. The advantage of this tone was that it was gentle, without any sharpness. But the problem was, Niu Gue had no sincerity at all. "Your appearance is too special. You definitely can't hide it from others. Even if you're not afraid, there's no need to make a high-profile appearance and attract danger, right?" Niu Gue really wanted to speak, but Luo Nan said everything he could say. He didn't give Niu Gue any chance to refute. "So go in. Go inside and recuperate. There are far fewer bacteria and viruses here than outside. This is... Oh, it's a spatial fault. I specifically chose a relatively clean area of seawater nearby, and used it as a benchmark to create it. It's a very good space to store living bodies. The only problem is that it's not stable enough. It also lacks a nutritious environment. I'm currently thinking of a way to solve this problem." "Moo. Boss, I'm relieved that you're taking the initiative. To tell the truth, I'm a bit worried that forcefully stuffing an entire faith system crystal inside would cause unnecessary space-time disturbances or something. Who knows where I might throw you when that happens." Niu Gue's eyeballs were about to pop out. He didn't speak anymore, and his entire body shrunk back. Luo Nan was still expressing his gratitude. "It's great that you can cooperate. We can take this opportunity to do a practical experiment. If we publish a paper, I'll give you a name." Niu Gue howled miserably. He clawed at his limbs, wanting to turn around. But under Luo Nan's hands, he really didn't have the slightest bit of resistance. His vision blurred. It seemed that a slightly fishy seawater wrapped in cold air assaulted his face. And then... there was no then. On the deck, Zhang Yingying's reaction was roughly the same as Yin Li's when she saw this toy for the first time. She didn't know how to react for a time. Space-time-related abilities were always mysterious. It was especially easy for one's imagination to fill in the blanks. Especially since Xia City had Ouyang Chen, a big shot who created the logic world. And the essence of the logic world was indeed a spatial fault. Clearly, Zhang Yingying's imagination had gone a bit too far. Luo Nan originally wanted to spend a bit of time to explain things to her, but he had a feeling when the words reached his mouth. He swallowed them back down. He just laughed and said, "I'm going to use this move to move my grandfather's laboratory equipment away. What do you think?" Zhang Yingying's lips twitched. "It seems very convenient. You just have to pay attention to the moisture." Luo Nan laughed out loud. Before he could finish laughing, the rumbling of an engine came from the surface of the sea. It was completely different from the yachts, but the two were rapidly approaching each other. It was an extremely dazzling dark red motorboat. It approached from the port side of the yacht, which had already slowed down in speed. Soon, the motorboat and Luo Nan were on the same deck. The driver was dressed casually in shorts, an open-necked floral shirt, whistling a greeting to this side. Zhang Yingying was stunned at first, but her expression quickly changed. She could clearly feel the arrogant burning vitality of this person. Even though they were separated by a distance of more than 10 meters, Her face still felt slightly hot and even stinging. Unfortunately, that person only revealed his identity and greeted him. "I'll be leaving first." The first cafe on the left side of the pier. The motorboat rider sped up again, forcibly overtaking the yacht, and flew toward the bustling pier that was clearly visible not far away. "Blood demon?" Luo Nen made a final confirmation. "That's him." Zhang Yingying curled her lips and frowned unconsciously. "This is a lawless fellow." "That's great. We can do another experiment." Ha! When the yacht entered the Fuku Pier in the southeast of the archipelago, it found a berth and began to dock. Luo Nan had already disembarked the ship a step ahead. He refused Zhang Yingying's suggestion to bring up Her Majesty Empress Wu. He went straight to the agreed-upon location by himself. The words he said to Niu Gue before weren't a complete bluff. He really was considering it. He wanted to properly practice using a more appropriate attitude when the high seas auction began. He wanted to learn how to use a more appropriate attitude to carry out social interactions. There were still 10 hours until the auction. It was simply impossible to complete the grand counterfeit plan he had in mind. Luo Nen needed more time. What did he rely on to obtain time? More accurately speaking, what did he rely on to obtain all valuable things? Luo Nen didn't have a clear answer, but in any case, it wouldn't be the kind Niu Gue displayed. The meeting location given by Blood Demon was very easy to find. Plus, Blood Demon released a bit of his aura just in time to assist in locating Luo Nan. It didn't take Luo Nan much effort to arrive at this open-air cafe called Chia. The traffic of people at the Fuku Pier was enormous. This open-air cafe at the corner of the street had an excellent location, and its business was pretty good. However, Blood Demon, who had arrived a few minutes earlier, still occupied one of the best spots. He was still dressed like he was on the motorboat under the parasol. He was even barefooted. He was extremely relaxed and carefree. He saw Luo Nan appear in the stream of people, and he blew another whistle. He waved his hand in greeting from far away. "Brother Luo, over here." Luo Nan could only respond to the myriad of changes by remaining unchanging when faced with this fellow who was too familiar with him. He calmly walked toward Blood Demon's location. But when he was still 5 or 6 steps away, Blood Demon got up and left his seat with a whoosh. He walked over with quick steps and extended his hand. The handshake of a fleshly extraordinary often represented some sort of danger. But Luo Nan had come here with a fake water vapor body, so it didn't matter. Plus, looking at Blood Demon's behavior, he really didn't have any malice. All Luo Nan saw was passion. The two shook hands and Blood Demon didn't let go. "Oh my, brother Luo. I've been waiting for the stars and the moon. You've finally come. I won't hide it from you. I came here today with a clear objective. I'm thirsty for talent, and I'm looking for talent. I ask that you agree." Luo Nan. "Oh my, I'm excited. I'm excited. Blame me for not saying it clearly. Today, I represent the board of directors, the management, and the chief editorial committee of Cards magazine. I'm acting as a representative with full authority to invite Brother Luo and Teacher Luo to be special artists for our magazine. We'll create a limited edition super luxurious card set. As long as you, Brother Luo, are willing to put pen to paper, the revised version of Cards magazine will certainly explode. It will become a legend. Of course, I will certainly pay you a satisfactory reward. Please." Chapter 10:10. It seemed that the situation was slipping in an unknown direction. Luo Nan felt baffled when faced with this kind of blood demon. If it weren't for the fact that the other party appeared to be reserved on the surface, Luo Nan would have suspected that he had encountered a shoddy salesperson. Luo Nan would have suspected that he had encountered a shoddy salesperson. Luo Nan expressed very politely, "Apologies. I don't quite understand. I was too excited. I didn't explain clearly." Blood Demon didn't come over to ask Luo Nan to sign his name. Seeing that Luo Nan didn't refuse immediately, he maintained his cordial attitude and dragged Luo Nan to a seat by the street. They both sat down, then he politely inquired, "What do you want to drink?" "Water is fine." It just so happened to replenish his water vapor body. He had shaken hands with Blood Demon just now, and his body had been burned by his exuberant blood energy. There was some damage to his body's structure. This couldn't be hidden from others. But neither Luo Nan nor Blood Demon cared about this. After the necessary pleasantries were over, Blood Demon began to lead the matter to the main topic. Brother Luo, it's like this. Aha, calling you brother should be very appropriate. Luo Nan had to give a bit of face to an extraordinary who took the initiative to express goodwill, regardless of whether it was true or false. Luo Nan found it hard to refuse, so he laughed and returned to being the introverted boy he was more familiar with. He wanted to see what sort of tricks this fellow with a belly full of desire to show off was up to. Blood Demon had the posture of having a long talk today. Let's go through things from the beginning. Let me first ask you, brother. Do you know about the matter of me investing money to purchase Cards magazine? Luo Nan responded honestly. I heard about it. I just heard about it last night. Yeah. It's just something that happened in the past 2 days. Blood Demon grinned. Actually, with your personality, I'm quite surprised that you know about this sort of senseless tidbit. Luo Nan really didn't know how to respond to Blood Demon's evaluation of the news that concerned him. Blood Demon seemed to be able to sense Luo Nan's thoughts. He laughed in an even more exaggerated manner. I bought it for fun in the first place. I'm happy, and I can make everyone laugh. Of course, that's even better. If brother knows about this matter, then you should understand what Cards magazine does. Yes. It's probably a ranking for extraordinaries? More or less. More or less. Blood Demon raised a finger. Speaking of rankings, do you know, brother? I'm just worried that you have a misconception. Luo Nan just felt that Blood Demon's thoughts were very free. Blood Demon said, I know you haven't been in this circle for long. But from the very beginning, the level of contact was very high. Recently, he had been dealing with Ouyang, the martial emperor, the true god, and Abner. Some time ago, there was also Gong Qi and Jin Tong. There were too many of them. How should I put it? Let me be more straightforward. Young people always look at things in black and white. If you're not a friend, then you're an enemy. Of course, you've really risen too quickly. Some of the older guys don't even have the time to adjust their attitudes. A second ago, they looked like they could do whatever they wanted, but in the blink of an eye, they're about to clash. This kind of embarrassing feeling is really embarrassing, you know? So, you have friends, and most of them are kind to you from the beginning. But there are many enemies, and they are often extreme. You see, Blood Demon's language was extremely exaggerated, but it was very picturesque. Luo Nan unconsciously associated it with a few people and a few things. Although Blood Demon acted like an old man and called him a young man, Luo Nan didn't feel annoyed. It was probably because of the novelty. Very few people said these things to him face to face, especially when it came from the mouth of an extraordinary. To a certain degree, it was more authoritative than the analysis of intelligence agencies. Listening to these kinds of evaluations could be considered a kind of correction. Luo Nan nodded. Quite accurate. Of course. I have a way of judging people. Blood Demon's smile never stopped. He waved his hand. I'm not analyzing your character. Actually, I really don't believe this. Young people change very quickly. You're only 17 this year, right? I'm 17 in June. Blood Demon's narration became even smoother after receiving Luo Nan's confirmation. You see, life has just begun. When I was 17, I only knew how to hang out in nightclubs. What about you? You've entered this kaleidoscopic circle for less than a year. The inertia of your previous character is still in effect. The things you've been looking forward to all this time have yet to be accomplished. The explosive conflict hasn't ended yet. You don't even have the chance to breathe a sigh of relief. Just like this cup of fruit wine before me. The dregs haven't even settled yet. Who knows what the situation will be like in the future? You'll have to wait for a period of time. Maybe a year or two, maybe 3 or 5 years. Then, you'll suddenly reach a period of peace. When that time comes, we'll definitely chat about different topics. Perhaps you'll be as unbearably vulgar as me. Perhaps you'll be even less popular than you are right now. But you'll definitely change greatly. This is because 1 year in this circle will have an effect on your previous circle of life for 5 years. Sooner or later, the traces of your previous life will be distorted and even melted away. I dare guarantee that. Luo Nan was deep in thought. Blood Demon suddenly slammed the table. F***CK. We're off topic again. What were we talking about? We were talking about the rankings. We were talking about my misconception. That's right. Misconception. Blood Demon used a finger to poke at Luo Nan's chest. Brother, you've been up and down for over half a year. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the conflicts you've had with extraordinaries aren't just a few times. But you're a special case. Do you know that? Huh. I'm definitely a special case. Blood Demon's tone was extremely resolute. In the blink of an eye, he tossed out another question. According to what I know, your direct conflict with extraordinaries, on the surface, is probably with Jean Tong? Luo Nan chuckled, declining to comment. Blood Demon didn't mind. He continued, that was last winter. Looking back in time, do you know the last time there was a conflict on the level of extraordinaries? It was a huge fight, the kind that resulted in serious injuries and even deaths. Do you know when that was? Luo Nan had a bit of an impression of this person. I think it was Mr. Unchangeable Gold? That's him. That was a matter from 1993. What about before that? Luo Nan could only shake his head. Blood Demon began to count with his fingers. Going even further back was 91. The clown Raby challenged High Lord's secret contract to a duel. This was because of the large and small ghost cards that were suspended in the Cards magazine. This was also the time when the magazine was at its most glorious. Actually, there are quite a few things like ranking lists that involve us on this level. But only the Cards magazine has a bit of novelty. In addition to this glorious period of history, I took aim at it this time. I plan on adding a bit more flavor to it. Going even further back was the latter half of the 90 year. Apollon lost a High Lord secret contract and signed his name. Otherwise, Old Man's secret contract wouldn't have pulled Raby out for a duel if he hadn't revealed his ability. Going even further back was the beginning of the same year. It was Nick, that wastrel. He did things that angered even the heavens and the people. He was chased deep into the sea, not daring to come ashore for the rest of his life. Looking again. There's nothing left. Brother, take a look. More than half of the 90s have passed. There are only so many battles between extraordinaries that can be said to be true. Of course, these battles don't include those where both sides have misgivings about fighting. Don't you think that's very boring? Ah. Luo Nan really didn't think so. Blood Demon raised his eyebrows. This is the difference in our understanding. We can put it aside for now. The truth is that the 80 to 90 extraordinaries in the entire world have far too little direct communication with each other. Everyone is secretive. They look left and right. Even though they wish they could pull out the tendons and flay the skin of some people, they are always worried that the cranes and clams will fight, and the fishermen will benefit from it. All of them are very bashful. Of course, there are also the constant indoctrination of the Star Alliance Committee. They constantly pull the reins. Why do you think the Deep Blue platform suddenly entered actual combat at the end of the 90s? It's because they were frightened by the fight between Old Man's secret contract and Apollon. You need to guard against the wilderness, but you need to guard against extraordinaries. Blood Demon was excited. He didn't give Luo Nan any room to interrupt. His mouth gushed without end. In this sort of situation, what do the vast majority of extraordinaries look at in terms of strength? They never look at each other's battle results. At most, they use the foundation of their basic realms to replace it with their battle results against mutants. Actually, if it's really just like this, then it's fine. Then you guys just put in Dongxing in the #1 position under the heavens. But that fellow is just a 10 of spades. He almost didn't make it into the top 16. What's the reason? Because the ranking also takes into account the social status, academic achievements, political influence of the people on the ranking. Hehe. So, Abner is the king of spades, Mao Zhengye is the king of hearts, and Lanier is the king of clubs. Let's not even talk about the 4 from the 3 great orders. Luo Nan was already a bit strained. He knew of Dongxing because Baijan of City was a legendary character even in the secular world. An NPC character modeled after Dongxing existed in the 10 Days in the Wilderness. It wasn't a hero. It was a commander who issued daily missions. It was a very transcendent kind. As for Lanier, He seemed to be the number 2 figure of the Order of Justice. As for Apollon, Nick, and Rabbi the Clown, Luo Nan only had a vague idea. Perhaps his best choice right now was to go online and look up the last issue of Cards magazine. Then again, these were just details that were unfriendly to those with obsessive-compulsive disorder. The true core content was Blood Demon's basic intentions. Though Blood Demon took a big detour, Luo Nan was still able to hear it. This bro simply wished for the whole world to be in chaos. He wanted to rely on the influence of Cards magazine to fan the flames among the various extraordinaries in the inner world. There was a certain concept in the inner world circles that equated extraordinaries with high-yield nuclear warheads. From Luo Nan's perspective, the theoretical destructive power of a nuclear warhead was certainly far greater than that of an extraordinaire if he were to use mathematical formulas to convert them. But on the plane of reality, he already had the right to speak about what an extraordinaire could do. Two extraordinaries clashed head-on, especially in the form of a life-and-death contest, and the consequences that would occur were truly chilling to think about. If Blood Demon was in an ideal state. Luo Nan didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to help, even if it was just to do some side work. He absolutely didn't want to. Mr. Blood Demon. Blood Demon raised his hands and pressed them down, interrupting Luo Nan's words. I understand what you want to say. It's most likely something along the lines of, those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. However, bro, please don't ruin the current atmosphere for now. Actually, I can be a bit more tactful. I can even not tell you. I can just discuss the contract as it is and discuss it as it is. But I still said it. This shows an attitude, a respect. I respect your status. I respect your intelligence. I respect your strength. I respect your strength. Let's lay everything out clearly. Business is business. In the end, we still need to return to the conditions. Blood Demon extended his hand as he spoke. He picked up the locked briefcase that he had placed to the side earlier and slapped it onto the table. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.